It would appear that the entity wants us alive.
Why? So we can fight? And fight and keep coming back for more like some bloody coliseum? What's next? The roar of crowds?
Bridge to all decks. Brace yourself for an exciting and super-sized episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
And I'm Steve Morris. And Scott, I'm feeling strangely angry and violent and ready to have a lot of conflict with you right now.
Well, just make sure you don't have that conflict while brandishing a sword, Steve Morris, because we are doing our deep dive on one of my all-time favorite episodes of Star Trek. That is Day of the Dove. I have always loved this episode, and I'm very excited to announce that after our deep dive conversation, where we are joined by another guest, we are going to have an exclusive interview with the very first woman ever to play a Klingon on Star Trek. That's right, Susan Howard, who plays Mara, Kang's wife and his science officer in Day of the Dove, is going to join us after our deep dive analysis of Day of the Dove for a very special interview, and you are going to love it.
I just can't wait for all of you to hear it. This interview with Susan Howard is absolutely incredible.
Steve, I remember when we first started doing Enterprise Incidents a year and a half ago, and we were talking like about episodes that we couldn't wait to do, and I specifically brought this episode up, and it just felt like so far away because it was like the middle of the third season and we hadn't even like dived into the cage yet. So, but what's amazing is how fast time goes, especially when you're having fun, and fun is exactly what we have had all this time on Enterprise Incidents. And now we are finally here with our deep dive of Day of the Dove. And we are joined by a very, very, very special guest, someone who I've been reading for many, many years, someone who I have seen at Star Trek conventions for, yes, many, many years. And she has been writing about pop culture and parenting and a whole lot of other topics for print, digital, and TV. More importantly, and this is where my heart really goes out to her, she survived her very confusing adolescence by being the lone female Star Trek fan in middle school. Now, I was the only male Star Trek fan in middle school because all my friends were Star Wars fans, so I completely relate. But more importantly, she is a contributing writer for the official StarTrek.com website. She is a senior editor for TrekMovie.com, a website that I refresh like 4 or 5 times a day. And she is the co-host of the All Access Star Trek podcast at TrekMovie.com. New episodes dropping every Friday morning. And if you love Star Trek, and of course, obviously you do because you're listening to us here on Enterprise Incidents, then you must be listening. This All Access Star Trek podcast has to be your destination every Friday morning because you will get the latest and greatest breaking news on all things Trek across all the platforms, TV, film, books, whatever, merchandise, you name it. Welcome to Enterprise Incidents. Welcome aboard, Laurie Ulster. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited to talk about this episode, and I really enjoy listening to you guys go through all the episodes here. I like the take that you have, the way that you view the series is a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate that. You know, we really have been looking at Star Trek as a serialized show, at least the original series. And Laurie, as you know, it's an episodic show. But during our entire podcast, Steve and I have realized that it actually works as a serialized show. And even this one that we're about to dive into. But Laurie, I'm going to throw the first question to you. That like. What is your take on Day of the Dove? How have you felt about Day of the Dove for all these years?
I mean, it's so funny because with the original series, everything's partially tainted with watching it as a kid. So that viewpoint I always have, which is like that slap on the back at the end, I thought was one of the greatest things ever. And we used to imitate it all the time when we were kids. But my view of this episode is I think it's a fantastic story. I think the moral could not be more relevant for what's going on right now in the world.
Yep.
I think it has a lot. It shows like great Kirk stuff, great Spock. Everybody gets their own scene. Nurse Chapel isn't in it. Everybody else has a scene, which I
Yeah.
like.
Uh-huh.
And it has a lot of what I call season 3-isms, like little things that aren't really explained or maybe thought all the way through. And yet it's still, I think, a great episode from start to finish.
Steve, how about you?
So it's funny. There are a bunch of episodes, which obviously I watched many times and knew backwards and forwards. And this, strangely enough, wasn't one of them. I obviously had seen it a bunch, but not in a long time. And man, I agree, Laurie. There is so much about this episode that is about this moment we're experiencing right now in time. And it was really powerful for me watching it this time.
Those are great points, Laurie and Steve, because this is an episode that I have always loved. Steve and I have talked many times about when we're doing these deep dives, and I go back and I rewatch the episode. There are certain episodes that, I really don't have to rewatch it because I just watched it like 5 days ago. And there are other episodes where I haven't seen in a really, really, really long time. And I rewatch it and I go, wow, there's a lot to take out of this these days. Like Miri is an episode I never really watched a whole lot, but when we did it for our deep dive, I was like, boy, this really fits in with what's happening now with like a pandemic. But regardless, Day of the Dove was relevant, extremely relevant as a peace message for 1968. And boy, is it relevant now with like everything else that is going on. So I agree there. But this is an episode I always felt was really, really exciting, invigorating. And the pace is just so like doesn't slow down really for a minute until like Act 4. It's a fast-paced action adventure, and of course it features the first woman to play a Klingon with a speaking part, and that is Mara, played by Susan Howard, and she was the only woman to play a speaking Klingon in the original series. But it is Michael Ansara's performance as Kang, which during this rewatch is one of the big revelations that I had with Day of the Dove. And the reason for that is that Ansara brought so much gravitas to the role as Kang. And unlike John Colicos' Core, it was Michael Ansara's Kang who really set the standard and raised the bar for the portrayal of Klingons in The Next Generation and certainly every other series that followed. It was the blueprint for the nobility of the Klingons. And also Ansara had such a commanding presence and a commanding voice. And he's really the only other Klingon after John Colicos' Core who really was an equal to Kirk. Like, I felt like Core and certainly Kang were on his level or even a threat, because in the case of Kang, Michael Ansara towers over William Shatner, which is something that he actually let happen. But of course, also, Laurie and Steve, Day of the Dove, and this is really important, especially to me, Day of the Dove is photo novel number 10. And I have talked endlessly on the show, especially when we came to an episode that had a photo novel counterpart. Laurie, do you have the photo novels? Did you read them?
Would you believe this? I have all of them except that one.
We
which
got
is crazy. I just went through my whole collection and I was like, what? And that is the only one that's missing.
Oh, you're missing number 10. We got to fix that.
I got to get number 10. Maybe in Vegas I'll see it. The thing about Michael Ansara too, I thought he had such a Charlton Heston vibe in this. Like this commanding, owning, the voice that silences the other voices in the room. And you're right, I do think he was the blueprint for Next Generation Klingons because he had a nobility. And as when we get into it, there are bits of dialogue that he has that we haven't heard from Klingons before.
Absolutely. There are so many great quotable lines, and most of them are spoken by Michael Ansara as Kang. I mean, look, I love John Colicos' Core, and originally the producers of Star Trek wanted Core to come back for Day of the Dove. And John Colicos wanted to come back because he read the script, but he was overseas, presumably filming the movie Anne of 1,000 Days. And he was unable to return. But I think, no, nothing against John Colicos' Core, because he was the first one. But I just feel like Michael Ansara took it to another level. So Day of the Dove, what I love about it, in addition to everything else, and everything else we'll talk about, is that it was written by Jerome Bixby. And just seeing the name written by Jerome Bixby on an episode that has a lot of three seasonisms, like you said, Laurie, where it's like, the quality definitely suffered. And a lot of people have been gone, Finnerman and Bob Justman leaving. But seeing Bixby's name, he, of course, wrote Mirror, Mirror, and he co-wrote By Any Other Name, which is an episode I love. They co-wrote it with Dorothy Fontana. But when he submitted his story outline on March 28th, it was called For They Shall Inherit. When he revised his story outline on April 14th, that's when he changed the name to Day of the Dove. So Fred Freiberger proceeded all the way to a fourth revised story outline, because when we get into it, you're going to hear like the original story was very, very different and sounded a lot more expensive. And it was Freiberger who said, we got to tone this down and bring it in on a budget here. So Freiberger's outline polish came in on June 3rd. Jerome Bixby proceeded to a second draft teleplay on August 9th. Arthur Singer did his rewrite, his final draft on August 15th, and then Freiberger did his script polish, his revised final draft on August 19th. This is the second episode directed by Marvin Chomsky, who previously directed And the Children Shall Lead. So I feel like, this was a palate cleanser for him because he got to direct a really, really good episode. Day of the Dove aired on November 1st, 1968. It was the 62nd episode to air. It was the 67th episode to film, and it was filmed between the dates of August 22nd and August 29th. Now, here's something really cool that I did not know about Day of the Dove. So as you both know, and as everyone listening knows, the directors for season 3 were under a strict mandate to bring these episodes in 6 days or else. Well, Day of the Dove came in at 5.5 days. 5.5 days. So when the episode started filming on August 22nd, it actually started filming after lunch because in the morning, Tony Leader had to finish For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky. So Day of the Dove also came in almost $4,000 under budget with a final cost of $174,735. The score was tracked from previous music. A lot of it came from A Land of Troyes, which was also a heavy Klingon episode. And the visual effects for Day of the Dove were provided by the Westheimer Company, which did the Klingon ship exploding, the Klingon transporter, which is still pretty cool to this day, and of course, the glowing, twirling, swirling alien entity. So very, very interesting stats about this one.
Would you like to hear what's going on in the world when they're making this episode?
Yes, absolutely.
It's funny because there are some things in here that are as contentious in the world as they were both in this episode and really as things going on today. The first, as you said, was filmed between August 22nd and the 29th of 1968. The first is that in Coswell County, North Carolina, the last remaining segregated school in the United States was ordered to integrate. Now, it might seem surprising to you that it takes so long after Brown versus Board of Education to integrate schools, but the fact is schools are almost as segregated today as they were back then. So we're still dealing with these issues.
Wow.
On August 24th, France became the 5th nation to explode a hydrogen bomb after the US, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and China. Dissidents were arrested in Moscow on the 25th for protesting the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And now there are dissidents in Moscow protesting the invasion of Ukraine. Scott, you know what I'm going to ask you? There was a song released on August 26th, 1968.
August 26th, 1968. I'm going to say that song was something.
Scott, I'm
going
to have to say you did not win Final Jeopardy this time. It was Hey Jude was released on August 26th.
It was that late. I didn't realize Hey Jude was that late. Well, it was definitely the longest single ever released by anybody.
Well, all right, you've redeemed yourself with the trivia. On August 28th, and this is tragic, and I'd never heard it before, the U.S. ambassador to Guatemala, John Gordon Maine, was assassinated. It's the first time an American ambassador had been murdered. We mentioned that the Democratic National Convention had started, and talk about contentious. Also on the 28th, Hubert Humphrey was nominated as the Democratic candidate for president, but right during his speech, the networks cut away from the Democratic National Convention because 15,000 anti-war protesters were marching down Michigan Avenue, where they confronted the police, or more accurately, the police confronted them with billy clubs and tear gas. And we heard the chant, "The whole world is watching."
Wow, amazing.
7 months later, the leaders of that protest, who would become known as the Chicago 7 or the Chicago 8, if you include Bobby Seale, were indicted on federal charges of crossing state lines to incite a riot. And if you are more interested in this, I think Aaron Sorkin's film of the trial of the Chicago 7 is excellent.
Yes,
and well
absolutely.
worth checking
By the
out.
way, to hear all this stuff about the Democratic National Convention, and so the cast and crew, they're going to Paramount to film Star Trek, film Day of the Dove, which is definitely an episode with a very, very big message. And they're hearing about all this. I mean, that must have been like very meta for them to be doing this episode while all this was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much about that conflict between the protesters and the police is, two sides that cannot understand each other at all coming to blows.
Report, Mr. Chekhov.
Full scan. Results negative. Radiation level normal. No evidence of a colony nor any residual after effect of a force that might have annihilated it.
This is definitely a situation that is there's a lot at stake, because when the landing party beams down, and it's really just one red shirt, it's David O. Ross as Lieutenant Johnson, previously Galway.
Yeah.
But the way they're beaming down, and they're sort of in a position of like sort of attack position, so immediately that something is up.
An entire human colony. A whole settlement. 100 men, women, and children. Why?
But there's no trace of anything. And then right at that moment, you see this twirling ball of energy, like immediately.
So I want to deconstruct this episode a little bit, because this is one where it's not always clear exactly what is really going on. So let's be real clear about this. There was no colony here, correct?
Right, correct.
So when they're looking around and we see plants and trees and there doesn't look like any destruction at all, they're already being fooled.
So let's deconstruct this episode, starting with this like twirling ball of energy. Now, there is no mention throughout this episode of like what this thing was, where it came from, even though there was a cut line from the screenplay that kind of does identify it, but it was never used in the final version of the episode. But according to the book series, the Next Generation book series, the Q Continuum, the aliens did have an origin story there. But, the books are great, but they're not canon. So I have a theory.
Interesting, because I have theories too. So go ahead. I'm very curious.
Okay,
I have one as well.
So the cut line, there was a line that was cut from the screenplay that referred to the alien entity as the Tharn, and they could not control their violent impulses, so they destroyed themselves through war, and this entity was the last of its kind. So entities destroying themselves was mentioned in And the Children Shall Lead, so that was one of the reasons why it was cut. But since it was cut, and we don't know what this alien energy force is, I have a theory, and my theory is that it is Reject. And here's why. Laurie, check this out. So at the end of Wolf in the Fold, when Reject is beamed down into space, presumably he just disappeared and died, and that was the end of it. And what did Reject do? Reject fed off of fear. That is where Reject gained his strength. Well, what if maybe when Reject was beamed down into space, it mutated because it beamed out into space as an energy force. So now, as it sort of regained itself, just like Nomad regained itself in the Changeling and was different, maybe now Rejak feeds off of violence. So I think for the purposes of Enterprise incidents and trying to link episodes, I am linking Day of the Dove to Wolf in the Fold, and I'm linking this energy force to Rejak, and I'm saying that this energy force is a mutated version of Rejak.
Now, since it was also capable of transmutation, do you think it merged with something the way Nomad did? Because that power had to come from somewhere.
Exactly. Yes, I absolutely do. Now, who knows what it could have mutated with or what could have bonded with, but I was definitely thinking of the Changeling because Nomad had a purpose, and when Nomad collided with the other, its purpose changed. So Rejak is out there. They're thinking it died, but maybe it didn't. Maybe it merged with some other energy force that had the power to not only feed off of violence, but to have this ability to change matter and also mess up with the minds and change the memories of the people so that they would fight more. So, but in some way, I'm just kind of going with this theory that this is actually Rejak.
Scott, it's funny that you say that. I have a whole theory. I think, so first of all, my feeling is that this is related to Rejak, not necessarily the same creature. All right. Are you ready? This is a big one. Okay.
Okay, let's hear it.
So this is a floating ball of energy, right? And there's later on in the episode, Spock says, we've never seen anything like it. It's totally unfamiliar. And I'm like, well, it's not really totally unfamiliar because we've seen the Organians are floating balls of energy. We've seen Trelane's people, they're floating balls of energy. The Charlie Evans people are probably floating balls of energy. Apollo, that's probably not really his body. So like, first of all, that's the idea that at some point we can evolve into total forms of energy seems to be something that happens in Star Trek. In fact, we even have the people that we meet from Return to Tomorrow. They, in the process of doing that, had a war, and we have Henoch versus Sauron. And what it seems like is that there's something really dangerous in this transition, that it can go really, really bad. It can end up as the Organians, which is awesome, but it can also end up in a bad place. And so here's the thing I was thinking about. Who are the very first aliens we ever meet in Star Trek?
From the cage, the Telosians. Yeah.
And the Telosians have evolved way beyond us, and they have the power to create illusions and to mess with people's minds. But as they've done that, they've lost the ability to experience emotions. And so they're desperately trying to experience feelings that they can't experience on their own, right?
Yeah.
Well, it would seem to me that those guys are right before they're going to make that transition like we see in Return to Tomorrow. They are heading there. And that we also know that experiencing human emotions and feelings and sensations can be really dangerous because we've seen in Cat's Paw and by any other name that could really mess you up. And so what if it's navigating this moment of how do I let go of human experience? That is the dangerous thing. You could either become Henoch or you could become the Organians. And so I think this is what happened, is that Rejak and this creature are ones who didn't navigate this transition well, and that they become obsessed with specific human emotions that they need to feed off of, that they are the cautionary tale. And also you think about like Trelane. What's Trelane doing? I want to experience human feelings. He's in the same position, maybe one step beyond the Telosians, but not yet at the Organians. And so that's what I think. I think all of Star Trek has been leading towards this idea, and we have Spock, who is between logic and human emotions, is that we need human emotions somehow to navigate it as we evolve, or we're going to become Rejak, or we're going to become this creature.
Okay, see now I thought I was going to just blow your minds here with my Rejak theory, and boy, Steve, you topped me in a big way. But Laurie, so the question is, like, have you ever given a lot of thought to like what this energy force could be?
So instead of thinking about its history, I was struck as I watched this time thinking about its future and thinking about Next Generation, and Armus is what I started thinking about.
Okay.
If it like
all right.
evolved into something where it finally shed all that negative stuff and became the big gooey black slime monster that killed Tasha and tried to eat Riker, then that to me was like the progression of it. So you guys were looking back and I was looking forward.
Interesting.
Not my favorite episode of Next Generation.
Well,
but
not anybody's favorite episode.
I like
Evil.
the theory.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense.
That does make a lot of sense.
Sensors have picked up a Klingon ship, closing fast.
Reflectors on, condition red. Protect yourselves. Total reply if attacked. So that's the answer. Klingons.
Trouble aboard the Klingon ship. Evidence of explosions. Massive destruction.
And you can see in the version with the new visual effects that the Klingon ship is in a bad way.
So I have another question now. What's happening on the Klingon ship? Is that real or is that an illusion?
I really wanted to ask you guys that because we know that the colony is a complete illusion.
Right.
But Kang says 400 of his people have died. And they do end up blowing up the ship because it's leaking radiation.
Right.
So did that happen and who was able to do that?
Like what caused the Klingon ship to be ready to explode and who killed those 400 people?
Well, and it's possible that nothing was making the Klingon ship ready to explode. It was all an illusion like this is, and that Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise killed those 400 people when they blew up the ship.
Or that there were never 400 other people. That was my other theory, was that that wasn't such a big ship and there weren't 400 other people.
Well, when the Klingon ship approaches the Enterprise, it's there's explosions going on, and Kang says when they beam down, 400 of my crew dead. Like something must have happened. Like what caused the destruction? Like when the Enterprise shows up at the planet is called Beta XII-A. When the Enterprise gets there, the Enterprise is fine. But the Klingon ship is ready to explode. Something attacked the Klingon ship, killing 400 of its crew. What was it? Maybe, probably, maybe. But did it have something to do with the alien entity? Was the alien entity affecting something else which attacked the Klingon ship? Lots of questions here and just things to ponder because, of course, we don't know the answers. But as they're talking about the Klingon ship, so Kang beams down with a few Klingons and walks right over to Captain Kirk and smacks him across the face, and he goes down, and Kang is pissed.
You attacked my ship. 400 of my crew dead. Kirk, my ship is disabled. I claim yours. You are now prisoners of the Klingon Empire against which you have committed a wanton act of war.
And one thing we see before the end of the teaser is that creature floating in space turns red.
That is a great teaser. One of the great teasers, one of many great teasers of the original series. And Laurie, Steve and I have talked many times how when it came to those teasers, the original series really did it best.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I also think the music they had on the original series was such a huge part of why they were so effective.
Yep.
The score always just punched it up. And there's so many familiar themes in the score in this one. But yeah, 100% the best teasers. Almost ruined me for other TV shows for the rest of my life.
I mean, look, as much as I love Next Generation, some of the teasers there are just kind of like, really, that's it? That's the setup? But, nothing against Next Gen. So, but of course, Michael Ansara plays Kang. He was born in Syria, and interesting to note that his second wife was Barbara Eden from I Dream of Jeannie. So on TV, Michael Ansara was in shows like Broken Arrow, Wagon Train, Rawhide. He did do I Dream of Jeannie. He was Killer Kang in some episodes of Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which is a show that I loved growing up. He was the voice of Mr. Freeze in Batman, the animated series. And, of course, he reprised his role as Kang on both Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. On the big screen, he was in films like Julius Caesar, the 1953 version with Marlon Brando, Princess of the Nile, the 1954 movie with future Captain Christopher Pike, Jeffrey Hunter. He was in Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, The Lone Ranger. He had a small role in The Ten Commandments, and he was in the big screen version of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
He also had another role on Deep Space Nine, right?
Yes, he did. He did
Yeah.
have another role in Deep Space Nine. So it's like great that he gets to come back and do the other shows with the makeup that we've come to expect from the Klingons. Now, in the early version, like the early versions of Day of the Dove, when it was still in outline form, the Enterprise is sent to evacuate a colony of Klingons from a border planet whose star is about to go nova. Now, the whole Nova thing was like becoming a trope in season 3 because, we have the sun about to go nova in The Empath. We have Sarpedon about to go nova, Beta Niobe about to go nova in All Our Yesterdays. But anyway, so the Klingons are found dead after apparently being tortured by a humanoid race called the Dorn. No relation to Michael Dorn. But
Or the Gorn.
You're the Gorn. But they now want to pit humans and the remaining Klingon survivors against each other in gladiatorial games like Bread and Circuses and Gamesters of Triskelion. So safe to say that the earlier versions of this story were thankfully rewritten by Fred Freiberger and Bixby himself and even Arthur Singer.
We come back in Act 1, and I'm just going to say this. We don't have to go into it, but I think the makeup on these Klingons is terrible.
Oh,
it looks awful, and there is some stuff that people might bring up about what that might mean, but we don't have to go into it here. But needless to say, even when I was a kid, I thought this looked terrible.
Laurie,
So
what's
did
your
I.
take on the makeup?
Yeah, the makeup's horrible. It just looks greasy and stuck on and ineffective and cheap.
Yeah, I always thought that when you look back at Kor and the Klingons in Errand of Mercy, they all had makeup on and Kor had a Fu Manchu, but then when you get to like Friday's Child and The Trouble with Tribbles, the Klingons kind of lost their bite. But with between Kang and Michael Ansara's performance and the makeup in Day of the Dove, I feel like the Klingons looked threatening again. And I never minded the makeup, but I know where Steve's going with that.
3 years, the Federation and the Klingon Empire have been at peace.
So he's saying it's been 3 years since the peace treaty that was established by the Organians after Errand of Mercy. And then he says something interesting.
The treaty we have honored to the letter.
Really?
Well, this is my question, though. Does Kang think they've honored it to the letter?
He must believe in his mind, in his altered mind being affected by the alien force that they've evolved, that they followed it to the letter. Because how do you explain the Klingons sabotaging the Quadro Triticale in Trouble with Tribbles for Sherman's planet? And how do you explain the Klingons furnishing the villagers with flintlocks in a private little war? So no, they did not follow this to the letter. And then there's like the presence of the Klingons in Friday's Child. No, they did not follow it to the letter. They were still causing trouble.
Well, here's what I've been thinking about is that certainly you could say that he's just altered by the alien and that, and he knows that they've been cheating but doesn't remember it.
Right.
You also could say that he totally believes it and doesn't know about that stuff. Because there's certainly time, we don't know everything that our government is doing all the time, and we've later found out stuff that our government was doing that maybe we go, oh, that wasn't really so good. So and I kind of go, which episode is better? And to me, the episode where Kang really believes this, not altered, is actually better than the episode in which he's lying or is altered.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it fits in more with his character and who he is. Like, he is a different kind of Klingon than we've seen for the most part. He has an integrity. He actually does. He's violent, but he has his own sense of not quite decency, but his own, a code. He has a code. And so I think the sneaky stuff would be not his thing at all. And he might even consider that's rogue Klingons or something versus Klingon policy, so to speak.
Yeah, and Laurie, it's that code that really stuck in my mind rewatching Day of the Dove that made me tie Kang to the Klingons, especially that we come to see in Next Generation after Ronald D. Moore really started, getting his hands into the Klingon culture, which are some of the finest episodes of Next Gen. But regardless, no, I see what you're saying, Steve, with that.
We took no action against your ship, Kang.
And Kang's response is great.
Were the screams of my crew imaginary? What were your orders, Kirk? To start a war, you've succeeded. To test a new weapon, we shall be happy to examine it.
There was a Federation colony on this planet. It was destroyed.
They're both in the same place.
When Kang is interrogating the landing party and he walks in front of Kirk, again, just seeing the way that Kang just towers over Kirk, the way that Michael Ansara towers over Shatner, just makes me afraid of this guy. Like, if I was Kirk, I'd be like, oh, this guy, I've met my match.
That was such a noticeable shot and moment, because also Shatner normally doesn't tend to look shorter than other people.
Right.
And I immediately Googled both of their heights while I was watching that scene, and I was like, oh, and Ansara was 6'3", Shatner was 5'10", because I was thinking, like, is that like a camera trick? Is that how they filmed it? They chose the angle to do that. It's like they didn't have to. It was right there.
I don't propose to spend the rest of my life on this ball of dust arguing your fantasies. The Enterprise is mine.
Well, this is the dialogue in this episode is really good.
Well, speaking of good dialogue, Kirk says,
Go to the devil.
We have no devil, Kirk. But we understand the habits of yours. I shall torture you to death, one by one, until your noble captain cries enough.
and at this moment, as we don't know what's going to happen next, and that creature, that alien is turning even more red, we hear Chekhov say,
Cossacks! Filthy Klingon murderers! You killed my brother, Peter!
He lunges towards Kang, which is pretty idiotic for him to do.
Just like you did here. My brother! You killed my brother!
Volunteer to join him. That is loyalty.
He motions for the Klingon to use their agonizer, which is what the Empire had in Mirror Mirror, so the Klingons have these agonizers. So then I was thinking again during this rewatch, we just covered Laurie, we just covered the Tholium Web. And in the Tholium Web, while the landing party is aboard the Defiant, the first Enterprise crew member to start falling prey to the fractured space that affected the Defiant. The first one, and by the way, the Defiant was motivated to kill each other. So Chekhov is the first one who gets affected. Now here we are in Day of the Dove, and you have this energy force that is feeding off of violence and initiating the violence so it can feed off of more of it like a vicious circle. And who's the first person to get affected here is Chekhov. And I'm thinking to myself, as much as I like Chekhov, he's kind of got a weak mind. He's easily influenced by these outside forces.
First of all, I love that you connected those things. That's awesome. The second thing, one of my questions is, when you were young watching it, or when it first aired, at what point do you think you start to go, something's weird about our guys?
Oh, in this episode?
Yeah.
Well, right now.
Definitely by now.
Yeah, because Chekhov was like, especially the way he was first established in the beginning of season 2 as this like sort of protege to Captain Kirk, who had like a fatherly paternal relationship with Chekhov in some ways. And also, Chekhov was, of course, he was sort of brought in to bring in a younger audience, but he was also a character that I saw myself in when I was a little kid because he was the youngest member of the crew. And in this episode, he was throughout the course of this episode, he's so very different. He's a violent person, and he becomes more violent in a very disturbing way as this episode progresses. But it was with this moment when I see Chekhov lunging towards Kang, who is basically twice his size, and I'm going like, yeah, something's way off here.
I actually think for me, it might even be earlier. The first thing is, in the teaser, they're talking about the destruction of this colony and we're in plants, and something seems weird with that. But then also, when Kirk hears about the Klingon ship, he says, get ready to fight. Basically, he doesn't say, hail the Klingon ship, which is what he would normally do. Mm-hmm. That would be the first move. He's always start with diplomacy, and he always has in all other Star Trek, except this episode.
And in my rewatch this time too, the fact that they got there and there was no evidence that there had been a colony or a weapon normally would have been a longer conversation. And even though as a kid, I never made that connection. When you watch it now, you go, oh, yeah, like they would be stopping and saying, wait, why? Can we check the distress call? When did they'd be asking questions and trying to go back to those records and figure, are we in the wrong place? Did we end up in the wrong place? What happened?
Sure. Like, why is there's not even like a mark of gunfire,
There's
like
nothing. It's
nothing at all. This planet has been untouched.
Well, it's not. And it's also, it's that there are trees and stuff there, which means that if there was a colony, the colony was destroyed and then plant life and all this other stuff was moved back in and everything was put back to normal.
Yeah.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah, those pink fluffy plants are like waving gently in the breeze.
Yep.
But needless to say, Kirk is not cool with Chekhov being tortured. He stops it.
Jim, you can't hand over the Enterprise. Don't plan any tricks, Kirk. I will kill 100 hostages at the first sign of treachery.
I'll beam you aboard the Enterprise. Once there, no tricks.
And that's the key word. Once there, no tricks. So Kirk flips open his communicator.
Mr. Spock, we have guests. Adjust transporter to wide field. Beam up everyone in the target area.
And with a subtlety that could hit you over the head with a sledgehammer, all right? He puts his communicator down, by his waist, and he's pushing a button that is alerting Spock that they are in trouble. But while it lacks in subtlety, I actually think it's a really cool scene. The way the camera then is on the arm of the chair and you see the alert light flashing, and it pans up to Spock, who raises his eyebrow, says,
"Understood, Captain."
It's a great moment, and I love the music.
And we end up in the transporter room, and strangely enough, only our guys appear on the platform, in part of which I go, it's not possible for them to actually beam up all of them at the same time. There are only so many paths, so I'm not sure what they were going to do anyway.
Right. And by the way, when the landing party beams up with the Klingons, the alien entity moves into the position where the landing party was at, and it just like disappears. It doesn't there's no visual effect to show that it was like beamed up with them. It's just like, well, let's just have it disappear, just like that. That's a budgetary move.
Yeah,
I was going to say that's what I mean by a season 3ism as well. Yeah.
What happened? Our landing party is intact, Doctor.
All others suspended in transit. Who are the guests, by the way?
Klingons.
Well, they're right in here.
Leave them where they are. Non-existence. That's so many less Klingon monsters in the galaxy.
That, for me, when I was a kid, that was my big clue.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I got it in that first scene when I was little, but because I started watching young. But I do think that for me, the minute he said that, and Kirk doesn't say anything back to him.
Yeah,
he kind of, right?
He should say, leave any bigotry in your quarters.
Right. There's no room for it here in the
transporter room. Well, I also think it's interesting when we do beam the Klingons, apparently there are controls on the transporter to decide which way people are facing. Because all the Klingons are facing the other way.
But there's also a function for them to be in transit, which is what saves the moment for them anyway, by allowing the landing party to beam through and get ready with more security so that they can take care of the Klingons when they all beam in. And I just like that for this moment, we actually see security acting like security. And you know what I mean? Like they jump right in, and before the Klingons can react, they move them off the transporter room, take their weapons away, get them out of there. And Kang just jumps down off the transporter room, gets right into Kirk's face, and he says,
"Liar!"
I said no tricks after we reached the ship.
I think two things. One is there is a trick. Clearly there was a trick on the ship. And two is I think when people have captured you and are torturing you, you can lie. Lying is perfectly acceptable at that point.
Right.
And we get a little bit more information. One is that there's still survivors aboard the Klingon ship. It's putting out a lot of radiation. We also hear that communications have been blocked.
And there's too much radiation coming from that Klingon ship. It's a hazard to the vicinity.
Prepare to destruct.
Completing the job you started.
You wouldn't be standing here if I had.
First group from the Klingon vessel, Captain.
There are so many great moments like that. There's dialogue which really jumps out at you. And there's dialogue that's just as effective, that's a little more subtle. And the restrained way in which Kirk says, you wouldn't be standing here if I had. I think it's a great delivery. And then the rest of the Klingons, the first group of Klingons are beamed aboard from the soon-to-be destroyed Klingon vessel. And that is where we see on the platform, not just one, but two women to female Klingons. And as security motions them off the transporter platform, one of them goes right to Kang's side.
My wife, Mara, and my science officer.
Mara is played by Susan Howard. She is an Emmy nominee for 1974's Petrocelli for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Drama Series. She was also on TV in The Virginian, Bonanza, Mannix, Love American Style, among other things. And for many seasons on Dallas, she played Donna Culver Krebs, and she also wrote some episodes of Dallas.
It's very cool. I also think it's cool that she's the science officer, by the way.
What do you think, Laurie, of Mara?
Well, I loved her outfit, by the way. She had like these shorts that I thought were super cool. No, she was a great character. And we'll get like her later scenes, I think, get even really more interesting. But I love that she was the science officer also. And that she came right up, and she's the one who has heard of these atrocities that she thinks that the Federation is responsible for.
I've heard of their atrocities, their death camps. They will torture us for our scientific and military information.
And I'll ask the same question. Has she, in fact, heard of atrocities in Federation death camps before this incident?
I assumed in that case that she had, because it makes sense.
I think so, too.
That these enemies would not know things about each other.
Well, and that's a classic tactic of war and conflict, is to tell lies about the other side. They're inhuman, they're awful, they're torturing people. That's how you motivate people to fight wars.
And Kirk even says later in the episode, well, first here he says, apparently you have a few things to learn about us. And later he alludes to, you've just been hearing propaganda. Propaganda was definitely prevalent in Berlin in the 30s when it came to Hitler's growing power. So I think that this is actually true, that this is not in her head, that the Klingons have actually propagated this image of Starfleet and the Federation.
And again, it fits in with what's going on right now, because we are filled with propaganda right now. Everybody's very clear on what the other side is doing.
That's for sure. The other side.
I find in our discourse, everybody's like, you're doing this, and the arguments are all based on, I'm going to have my own supposition about what I think you're doing, and then I'm going to attack you for it.
Yep.
And I think it's more than that, because I think we live in our own truth silos. And we're constantly fed information, and this is regardless of left, right, conservative, liberal, whatever. We are all fed information that matches our worldview and not hearing information that matches other people's worldview, and that is making us increasingly angry at each other.
Yep.
And as we head out into the corridor, we're going to see something we see all the time, which is this alien just leaving just before we get there, or just showing up just after we leave. We're going to see it over and over again throughout the show. And Spock already is sensing something's not right, because he says,
At the moment we received the distress signal from the colony on Beta XII-A, the Klingons were too far distant to have been the attackers. Moreover, they also were apparently attracted by a distress call.
They get in the turbolift. Chekhov is still really angry.
Lies. They want to start the war by pretending that we did.
Chekhov may be right. Klingons claim to have honored the truce, but there have been incidents, raids on our outposts.
No proof that the Klingons committed it.
And McCoy, who I think is definitely under the influence of the entity.
Absolutely.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
What proof do we need? We know what a Klingon is.
So a couple things here. Steve, you mentioned that Spock is already kind of on to something here. This made me think, with this new appreciation of the original series, that Day of the Dove really is a standout episode, is because, remember we were talking about the devil in the dark, and they were trying to figure out what was going on in the mines, like what was killing the miners, and they're in Vandenberg's office, and Spock is looking at this silicon nodule, and he's already formulating something. And here you have Spock already sort of ahead of where everybody else is. Spock knows and is accepting more than the others that something is not right here, and there is way more here than meets the eye, and the stakes are much, much bigger than we can even wrap our heads around at the moment. So I think there's an element of Devil in the Dark here with that approach of Spock sort of like already sort of formulating a theory, the beginnings of a theory, but not quite putting it out there like he did in such a poor way in an episode like "And the Children Shall Lead."
But I think that Spock is doing that. I think Kirk is already challenging, thinking things are going through his mind already, like something's off. He's always giving Chekhov a look. There's something going on. And I like to think that McCoy was sort of, his mind was maybe weakened a little, because when Chekhov was injured, his doctorness came forth, and he went down, and he saw that brutality, and in a way that opened the door, I think, for the influence. I'm sure I'm adding more than was there, but in my mind,
welcome to Enterprise.
Yeah, exactly. And I love my McCoy, and the look on his face is so unlike we've seen before. So I think it's obvious he's been affected, and now we know why. Whereas Kirk and Spock are still like parsing out the logic and the events that have happened.
So several things. The first is, Scott, building on what you said about Chekhov, I think we could say that McCoy's mind has also been weakened, because he just had a fatal disease that he was cured from in the last episode, when the world is hollow and I have touched the sky.
And that was after he was brought to the brink of death by the Vians, saved by Jem and saved by the Vians themselves in the Empire. So he's been through a lot.
Yeah. The other thing, though, is I think, while it makes perfect sense that Spock would be the least affected by this alien, it also, to me, is Kirk is showing his effects, because he should be thinking about what happened in Arena and the destruction of that colony. And, there was more to that story than I thought. I should immediately be questioning what's going on here. But he's not really doing it that much.
Our log tapes will indicate our innocence in the present situation.
Unfortunately, there's no guarantee that they will be believed.
Laurie, you mentioned the look that Kirk gives Chekhov. So when the turbolift doors open to the bridge and Kirk is about to exit the turbolift, I never really quite noticed this before, but Kirk is sort of staring down Chekhov, who's like staring straight ahead. He's not engaging Spock or Kirk. He's just like angry. He's in another world. And Kirk is looking at him going like, something is wrong with him. I got to keep an eye on this guy. And then he exits the turbolift.
I felt that very much too. And again, also that line of Kirk's, no guarantee they'll be believed. Again, 2022.
Yep.
We're right there again.
Yep.
Oh boy, are you right. Wow. Yep. Holy moly, are you right.
Still no contact with Starfleet Command, sir. Outside communications blanketed.
Keep trying. We've got a diplomatic tiger by the tail.
Can I just tell you guys, this was the first episode I watched since Nichelle Nichols died.
Okay.
And so when they walked into the bridge, I was very surprised. I had a very strong emotional reaction, and it caught me by surprise. I think about the fact I've seen all these episodes 20,000 times over the course of my entire life, and I got quite emotional. Like I had to stop for a second, because it was a jarring moment. And then I was so happy that she got some stuff to do in this episode.
Yep. And, Laurie, I know you did your own tribute to Nichelle Nichols on All Access and your podcast for Trek Movie. And, we just did ours like literally yesterday. And I had that reaction too, because Steve, after we recorded our remembrance of Nichelle Nichols, I went and I watched Day of the Dove to prep for today. And I had the same reaction, Laurie. Like when they walk off the bridge and Uhura just in her absolutely professional manner, still no word from Starfleet, and Kirk says, keep trying. I just went, oh, Nichelle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get that. We've totally evacuated the Klingon ship, and Sulu locks phasers on, and we destroy the Klingon ship. Now, I actually think that this is just the writers didn't really actually figure out why the Klingon ship had damage and what happened there. But I still will say there is some possibility that there were 400 living Klingons on that ship when the Enterprise blew it up.
Wow. First of all, if that's true, if the alien already had enough of a hold on the Klingons themselves to make them think that 400 of their own had died, and that was something that Kirk and Spock and the landing party from the Enterprise believed, and that Kirk firing the phasers actually killed 400 Klingons, like that's, well, Doc, that's heavy.
And I don't think that's what it is. I think that the writers just went, no one's going to pay attention. Let's move on, know?
Right.
When I take the ship, I'll have Kirk's head stuffed and hung on his cabin wall.
And they talk about the difference in manpower. It's 40 against 400. And one of the Klingons says,
4,000 throats may be cut in one night by a running man.
Great line. What?
I mean, a very tired running man, though.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
It's a lot of throat slitting.
I hope he runs quickly and he's, done some marathons to train before.
By the way, I had a buddy who was a Marine and part of Force Recon, which is like, the seriously scary guys. And in training, there was a thing where they were all out in the field and went to bed, and they were told that someone might attack their camp. And they all woke up, and like 30 guys woke up with black marker across all of their throats because one of the Marines went through and demonstrated exactly what this guy just said. Think about how scary that is.
That is definitely scary.
Yep. But I love Kang's response. He says,
patience, vigilance. They will make a mistake.
And he also says he wants to end the war quickly, which is
that's right.
Yep.
He says they want to end the war quickly, which makes me, again, you get the integrity, you get the code.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kang wouldn't want endless war. He wants to win and triumph, but it's not the battle. That's the part for him.
Right. He wants the victory, and he wants to get there as fast as possible. But we are back on the bridge, and there's a wide shot on the bridge, and you see the alien entity descend on the bridge and turn red. And as it turns red,
This doesn't make sense. Carriers are normal, channels are open, there's still no outside contact. I don't understand it, sir. Could the Klingons be doing something?
and then at that moment, the Enterprise shudders. And I love that look on Kirk's face. He just like turns around and like, now what? And then you see the Enterprise go off course. It's already out of control.
The engines have they gone to what line? By themselves.
It's interesting, by the way, to me that the shaking stops in mid-line and smooths out. I never quite understand what's going on, and that their new course is going to take them again out of the galaxy.
Course 902 Mark V. But what's interesting is in Is There in Truth No Beauty, when Marvick went down to engineering after he was driven mad by looking at the Medusan ambassador, he moves the few controls and the Enterprise is thrown off course, and in less than 20 seconds is in the void outside the galaxy, right? But in Day of the Dove, it takes them the whole course of the episode, and they never get to the end of the galaxy. So maybe they were on the other side of the galaxy in the Delta Quadrant. I don't know.
They were on one end and they were heading to the other end.
Right. Right.
Who knows? The big thing to me, and it happens all the time, is we've obviously proven that the Enterprise can actually travel a lot faster, and they never go, man, we should really work out how that works.
Yeah, sure.
And then as lights are blinking, we hear that emergency bulkheads are closed and almost 400 crewmen are trapped below.
And I just like Shatner's performance here. He just kind of stands there for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts on everything that just happened. They just destroyed the Klingon ship. Now they're being thrown off course. The bulkheads have closed, trapping 400 crewmen below decks. And he enters the turbolift. And I love this edit. Kirk gets into the turbolift, and the very next shot is a close-up on Kang's face. And he has a smile. He is amused.
Most interesting.
That's so good.
The bulk of your crew trapped. Your ship racing from this galaxy at wild speeds.
Delightful.
Yeah.
And then he asks,
how did I perform this sabotage, Kirk? All my men are here.
And maybe Kirk's like, well, maybe there's some other Klingons that beamed over undetected.
And before I put you in the brig, there's a little something I owe you.
And he winds up and throws his punch at Kang so hard that Kang falls back and is caught by the two other Klingons. Laurie, what did you think of this moment? And how did the impact of this moment to you change from when you were watching this as a kid to watching this now?
Yeah, I think as a kid, it felt like, oh, he's just mad. He's punching him. Men do that.
Yep.
And then
Todd and I do that all the time.
Right. Like, oh, men, punchy men. But of course, watching it now, you realize that's the beginning of seeing that Kirk is slowly being affected, because he was talking about diplomacy 5 minutes earlier.
Right. I agree. I think the same. Like when I was a kid, I just thought like, oh, there's, the bravado of Captain Kirk, shoot first, ask questions later, just being a macho guy, punching the Klingon in the face after he punched him in the planet. But watching it now, I just went, nope, that's very un-Kirkish. It was definitely something brought on by the alien entity. But what happens next changes the game once again.
Kang falls back and looks down at, and I think it looks like a game or something on the table that suddenly transforms into a sword. And Kirk and all of his people have phasers, and the phasers suddenly transform into swords.
But it makes that sound, that bong.
The bong.
The bong. That bong that you heard all the time when Trelane was using his power. You heard it in the beginning of Spock's brain when the crew was knocked out. I love that sound. I've always been a big fan of that sound. What does Kang do when he sees what's going on?
Kang grins, and Kirk looks sick to his stomach. I thought that was such a nice combination. Like, Kang is like, this is perfect. And Kirk is like, oh no.
Well,
so
it's like, you're right. Like Kirk, like you could see that at first he's bracing himself, making sure that no one's going to attack him. But then he like takes a second, he looks down at the sword, and he's like, what the heck is going on here?
And that's the end of Act 1. We come back in Act 2 into the same spot, right into a fight. And Kirk and his men make a very tactical retreat into the hallway. One guy gets hit and goes down, and they drag him into the turbo lift.
Can I disagree with you about the sword fighting for a moment?
Yep.
I felt like that was one of the very weakest points of the whole episode, was all the sword fighting really just looks like everybody's trying to hit everybody else's sword.
Well, I'll tell you why that happened, Laurie. There is a reason for the ineffectiveness of the sword fighting. While, look, just taking it from a point of a TV show airing in 1968, I accept it for what it is. I never really believed, even though Johnson took one in the heart, and that was the crewman who fell backwards, I never believed that anyone was really going to get hurt during a sword fight. But Laurie, the reason that the sword fights in Day of the Dove are, for lack of a better word, lame, is because NBC, the studio, was worried about the sword fights. They were in touch with Paramount and with Freiberger, and they said, okay, you want to have a sword fight, that's fine, but you cannot show the swords penetrating anybody's body. You cannot see any bloodshed coming from the sword during an impact with one of the other bodies, whether it's the Klingons or the Enterprise crew. So that is why during the filming of the sword fight scenes, Laurie, they kind of had to pull their punches. I completely agree with you. They're not as effective as they could have been, but they, given the restrictions in which they were filmed, I thought it was fine.
I still think when you look at, let's say, fencing later in Next Generation, obviously they had someone who knew about fencing who came and trained them. And in this case, I just felt like nobody looks like they're even aiming. They all just look like they're trying to hit the other sword. So, I mean, I forgave it. And as a kid, it was just, that's what sword fighting was to me as a kid anyway. So it fit in nicely. But as an adult, it just looks pretty lame.
Yeah, it's pretty lame. It looks like kind of classic stage combat style. And having done some fight choreography, Scott, I actually disagree, because you could do all sorts of great fight choreography that doesn't have people stab each other, and one of the keys, Laurie, you're absolutely right. You shouldn't look like you're aiming at the sword. That is a big, big mistake.
The Klingons are free. Armed as we are, they'll try and take the ship. Scotty, how many men do we have?
392 trapped below decks.
Deploy forces to protect your section and the auxiliary control center. Check the armory and try and free those trapped crewmen.
The doors and bulkheads won't budge. We'll have to cut through.
Blow out the bulkheads if you have to. We need numbers.
Another sort of revelation I had rewatching Day of the Dove is that, Steve, when we were talking about Charlie X and the Changeling, Roddenberry wanted, the notes that he gave the writers of those episodes, Dorothy Fontana for Charlie X and John Meredith Lucas for the Changeling, is like, he's like, make it to be that the Enterprise turns into a hell ship. Well, in Day of the Dove, no question, more than any other episode, in fact, the Enterprise turns into a hell ship.
The Klingon Empire has maintained a dueling tradition. They think they can beat us with swords.
Which means he thinks this is a Klingon strategy.
But what I like about this moment is that Kirk goes up to Spock and he's, just had an encounter, a violent encounter with the Klingons in a sword fight. He's standing there calmly analyzing the sword. He's looking down at the sword. He's not making eye contact with Kirk.
Captain, neither the Klingon technology nor ours is capable of this. The instantaneous transmutation of matter.
And then he says, and if they had this power, why would they make this even? Why wouldn't they give themselves superior weapons and us nothing?
And that gets through to Kirk. Also, Spock has had more time to be. Kirk's caught in the action, and he's basically spends the whole episode running from one place to the next, trying to contain what's going on. And Spock is the one who has a little more time to process and think about it. But I feel like you can see the wheels in Kirk's brain turning the whole time throughout the whole episode.
Yep.
Kirk gives Sulu some orders, who actually gets to get up from the helm and go do something, which he hasn't gotten to do that much lately. But it's not just Sulu who wants to go. Chekhov gets up and he wants to go.
Captain!
Mr. Chekhov, as you were.
Take off, sir! Let me go too. I've got a personal score to settle with the Klingons.
This is no time for a vendetta. Maintain your post.
I think this scene gets really intense, and both of them do a really good job.
I agree too. And, it was upsetting to me, like as a kid, to see Chekhov so not like himself.
Don't try to stop me, Captain. I saw what they left of Piotr. I swore on his grave I would avenge his murder.
Gets into the turbolift.
What's Chekhov's grudge against the Klingons? Who's Piotr?
His only brother killed in a Klingon raid.
His brother? He never had a brother. He's an only child.
And, they're sitting right next to each other, the navigation and the helm, all this time. They've gotten to know each other a little bit over the course of a 5-year mission. So I love that. Sulu was saying he doesn't have a brother. He's an only child.
I love it too. And for the same reason, which is what it does between this and maybe a little bit of a moment in the Deadly Years and maybe one or two other moments, is in my headcanon, Sulu and Chekhov are really good friends.
Yep.
Yeah, I felt exactly the same way. I thought it was a great moment that showed that they've talked, that they have a closeness. And that's because Sulu is so casual about it too. Like, what is he talking about? So it's not like, oh, I feel like he told me one time. It definitely implies that they've had a long-standing friendship.
Yep, for sure.
And I think they're doing a very good job of laying out this mystery piece by piece and building on it as we go. Because Uhura then says,
Captain, why would Chekhov believe he has a brother?
I don't know, but he does. And now he wants revenge for a non-existent loss.
And the way Uhura goes over the Captain Kirk comfortably, that she has that comfort level with him, that even though this is a very action-packed episode and definitely a little over the top in some ways, there's a lot of really good moments among the crew. And I feel like the way that they are acting with each other now is very different than if this episode would have aired earlier, like, let's say, the first season, because they've been, they're into basically the 5th year, because the star date begins with a 5. So they're into the 5th year of their 5-year mission. And there's a closeness there that has been deepened by so many events, like the ones we just saw on the Tholian Web and the Empath, and that Uhura went up to Kirk and expressed her concern because, he's more than just Captain Kirk to me. She feels a kinship with him. And then we see Chekhov in the lower decks, which brings me to my question. Okay, so if you're looking at a blueprint of the Enterprise, okay, so the alien entity has trapped 400 crewmen below decks. Well, when you're on the bridge, the bridge is as high as you can go. But when you get to the transporter room and sickbay and definitely engineering, you're going much, much further down below into the secondary hull of the Enterprise. So where exactly are these 400 crewmen?
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I actually have a different question. Is that I know so many people maybe listening to this show have whatever version of the Star Trek Enterprise blueprints, specs sitting there. When did those get created? Because I don't think they had them when they were actually making the show.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Well, the Star Trek blueprints that I have, I got when I was like 7 or 8 years old in the mid 70s. So those were the first time. That was the first time I got it through I got it in 1977 because I ordered them by cutting out the back coupon of one of those Star Trek poster books. And remember those poster books, Laurie?
Oh my God, I had them like with sticky tack stuck to my ceiling. After I finished reading them, I would always use the poster. But the blueprints, they came in a pouch, right?
Yeah,
like
they came in a pouch.
On the front.
They came in a pouch. And I remember when I was in my bedroom, I think it might have been poster book number 6, where you unfold it, and it was that image of the Enterprise from above being trapped by the Tholian web.
Yep.
And I had that on my wall in my bedroom, but I got a coupon on the back, and that's how I ordered the blueprints. And then, of course, I think it was sometime in the mid 90s when they had like this really lavish poster detailing all of the decks on the Enterprise. But anyway, in the case of Day of the Dove, this is something that they did not think through.
Right. We're in sickbay, and man, as bad as it is watching Chekhov not behave like himself, watching McCoy not behave like the compassionate McCoy we're used to, it's really rough.
Filthy butchers. There are rules, even in war. You don't keep hacking at a man after he's down.
The interesting thing there is that he says it about Johnson, who was only stabbed once.
Yeah, it's a great point.
DeForest Kelley, we have pointed out his strengths as an actor so many times. And that's another one of the revelations of doing this podcast, Laurie, is that, when we look at his performance in like For the World is Hollow, in The Empath, especially in The Deadly Years, when he's turning older, he's excellent. And even in Shore Leave, when he made the motion to sort of bring back that old country doctor accent, Southern accent. And in this episode too, but it's disturbing to see McCoy just so racist.
We're back with the Klingons, and they're discussing their battle plan as they look at specs of the Enterprise. So they obviously got copies of the blueprints. I don't know if they got that through the poster book.
Cut out the poster book?
Yeah.
Then we take this ship. A ship that is headed towards the end of the galaxy?
And Kang, being very wise, says,
In time.
It's exactly what Kirk would say. Basically, we solve the problem we can in front of us, and then we move on to other stuff. We cut to Scotty. We seem to be in a room that we're not quite sure where it is.
There's no use trying to free those men down below. The phaser torches, they won't cut through the bulkheads, or the doors, nor the decks. There's something happened to the metal.
What about the armory?
Well, I'm there now, sir.
Camera pulls back, and the armory is full of swords and halberds and spears.
That is a great cut, the way the camera pans back just as Scotty is saying.
And you never saw such a fine collection of antiques in your life.
It's such a well-directed scene on the part of Marvin Chomsky. And then Scotty closes his communicator. He notices one of the swords. He picks it up with pride.
You're a beauty.
What's interesting, and I never noticed this before, but the swords that each of the crew members use, the primary crew members that we know, were designed to match their backgrounds and their heritage. For example, Kirk is using an 18th century Navy outclass. Chekhov is using a Cossack broadsword. Scotty is using a Scottish claymore. Sulu is using a Japanese katana. And the rest of the Enterprise and Klingon crewmen are using Roman gladius with at least one mace, a medieval broadsword, and a scimitar. Really interesting stats about those swords, the way they match them with the backgrounds of the crew members.
Any signs of those devils, Mr. Sulu?
All clear, Mr. Scott.
And there, of course, are the Klingons crawling in to attack. So our defense wasn't really very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't really look very hard because they had to get up there. And I think if you could get in that way, maybe they could have looked to see if there was somebody coming.
Right, exactly.
And needless to say, they attack. Scotty fights his way back out through the door, and there's Sulu, who takes a dude out with the good old karate chop.
I hate that. I hate that.
Well, it's not only that. So that's really bad. But did you notice what's going on behind them? Is another security guy. He literally hits a Klingon on the arm, and the Klingon falls to the ground and is.
I saw that this time. Yeah, this red shirt who has no lines hits the Klingon in the arm, and he's knocked unconscious.
Yes,
and then Sulu comes in with the judo chop.
Yeah,
I like. Come on, did you like really? I mean, I know it's 68, but come on.
And I mean, technically, who should be the best fencer on the Enterprise?
Sulu.
Should be Sulu.
Right.
That's his hobby. He practices fencing. Yeah, it's a lost opportunity. Let's just put it that way.
No additional Klingons detected, Captain. It is an alien life force. I cannot ascertain its location.
An alien life force. We must make contact.
Contact, communication. That is what Kirk attempts to do or thinks he can do.
And this is where we sort of review. A brother that never existed, a phantom colony, imaginary distress calls, the creation of these weapons.
Do you sense a pattern, Mr. Spock?
If the alien is creating these events, Captain, it is apparently capable of manipulating matter and mind.
I think this line is really important. You know, we already talked about it at the beginning of this episode. I think we should all be thinking about this today. Spock says,
I am constrained to point out that since minds are evidently being influenced, we cannot know at this moment whether our own memories are completely accurate and true.
I think we should change our own memories to the news and the stuff that we see in the world, particularly if it's on social media. You should be checking whether or not what you see is true.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
And not just accusing people that you don't like of seeing things that aren't true. You have to look at your own stuff.
Yep.
I also think, and that's the main point of the whole episode, is today you have to think about who benefits from us being in such opposition to each other.
That's a great, great point. And Kirk says, as McCoy is entering, we must talk to Kang, bury the hatchet.
McCoy, like that was the last thing he needed to hear when he walked on the bridge from the turbo lift.
And McCoy goes off.
A truce? Are you serious?
I gotta say, you know, you said it before. Man, DeForest Kelley can play a horrible, angry, evil, scary, racist dude really well.
Yeah.
I've got men in sickbay. Some of them dying. Atrocities committed on their persons. And you talk about making peace with these fiends. If our backs were turned, they'd jump us in a minute. And you know what Klingons do to prisoners. Slave labor, death planets, experiments. McCoy. While you're talking, they're planning attacks. This is a fight to the death. We'd better start trying to win it.
And he even says, how many men have to die before you start to act like military men instead of fools? Ouch.
And Kirk's just looking at him like, what has happened?
Right.
He's fully noticing that something has happened to McCoy in a big way.
It's a really upsetting moment. It was particularly upsetting for me watching it this time. And he exits out, and we hear now from Kang.
Marvin Chomsky's direction of this episode, especially when it came to Kang, was very cinematic. When we cut to the moment on the bridge after the Enterprise is taken off course, and then we go to the room where all the Klingons are being held, and you see the look on, it's a close-up on Kang's face, and he's smiling. Most interesting. So in this case, when Kirk hears the hail, and you see the camera pan up to Kang's face, and that dramatic music, and he's almost smiling.
And Kirk tries to talk to him.
Kang, there's something important I must discuss with you.
I have captured your engineering section and now control the ship's power and life support systems. I have deprived all areas except our own. We'll die of suffocation in the icy cold of space.
Well, and that line, I mean, did that not echo throughout both of your childhoods? Like that line, you will die of suffocation in the icy cold of space. And that,
Absolutely.
Again, like Charlton Heston, like voice and the music comes, and it was such a big, I feel like it's one of the most classic moments.
Great end to Act 2, and you're right, the way the lights come down on the bridge, and Kirk and Uhura comes down off from her station and is looking for comfort from Captain Kirk, which makes me think of the line that she says in the next episode, Plato's Stepchildren, when they're being, forced to kiss by the Plutonians. And she says, I see you on the bridge. And she's making that comment about how, she's letting her guard down by saying how she really feels about Captain Kirk. And I think that this moment is what she's thinking about when she makes that comment in Plato's Stepchildren, because it just happened.
We come back in Act 3, and by the way, we should say that part of how we're seeing that the life support is gone is that a lot of the lights have gone off. It's a good visual metaphor. And after a log, Kirk sends Sulu to get the life support systems back online, and as he heads to the turbo lift, the door opens, and Scotty enters looking totally crazed.
Scotty, check out what's late, Captain.
I'm glad they found
We should have left those fuzz-faced goons in the transporter. That's right where they belong.
Scotty.
Non-existence.
And what's interesting, too, it's not just that he's angry at the Klingons. He turns on Captain Kirk.
Now they can study the Enterprise, add our technology to theirs, change the balance of power. You've jeopardized the Federation.
Scotty.
And then Spock comes over, and boy, does his tone change in a equally effective, but just as violent ways.
Mr. Scott.
Keep your fucking hands off me.
I mean, Scotty is far gone. He's just, checked out at this moment.
Your feelings might be hurt, you green-blooded half-breed.
Which is kind of close to what Kirk was calling him way back in What Little Girls Are Made Of.
Oh, yeah.
And where that time it was clear evidence to Spock that something was not right, this time it's now finally Spock that's being effective. And I gotta say, as upsetting as Chekhov was, as upsetting as racist McCoy is, as crazed as Scotty is in this moment, there is nothing quite so scary as calm Spock saying,
May I say that I have not thoroughly enjoyed serving with humans. I find their illogic and foolish emotions a constant irritant.
I have a question for both of you. Is Spock telling the truth?
Totally. Absolutely.
Yes.
He has found that an irritant.
What do you think, Laurie?
I mean, it's a chilling moment for sure because of the even tone that he has when he says it. But yeah, 100%.
I agree. I think he's telling the truth. I just think that the alien is affecting his mind for him to actually say how he was really feeling, because Vulcans are incapable of lying. So we've been told. But
clearly not true.
Right, exactly. Yeah, sure.
But it's amping it up. Like, I think it's something that he always feels. Like, because if you think about what the words he uses, I've not always enjoyed it. If you change the tone of your voice when you say that, it doesn't sound so terrible.
Right.
But it's all, now it's something, it's that thing that you think about that suddenly you've decided you're justified in being much angrier about.
Completely agree.
I think, this is what's going on throughout the episodes, is that the Klingons have heard about death camps and experiments, and McCoy has heard about raids, and all these things have truth in them, but they're all being amplified. And again, I'm going to apply it to our world today. There's some truthiness in there sometimes, and it's being amplified to make us angry and afraid.
Yep.
And Scotty says,
Then transfer out, freak!
Ouch. Scotty is just, dropping these bombs left and right.
And he raises his sword. Spock grabs him by the wrist, and man, he is about to punch down on Scotty in a way that I picture whatever that metal thing he crushed in This Side of Paradise is about to happen to Scotty's head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right.
He does so much with so little. It's not a big gesture. And yet it conveys all this violence and anger. It's beautifully done.
I remember when in Amok Time, when Uhura was hailing Spock that, hey, we're going back to Vulcan, and he goes over to the monitor. He's like, let me alone. And boom, boom, boom. Like he was going to do that to Scotty just now.
And Kirk steps in and says, I don't know why he says you're half human. It's a strange line. I don't know. Do you think oh, because you're going to hit a human, and I don't know, it doesn't quite work for me. And then he drops his hands after this moment and says,
"What are we saying? What are we doing to each other?"
And Scotty just looks confused at this moment, like trying to catch up.
Fascinating. A result of stress?
We've been under stress before. It's never set us at each other's throats.
I just like that even though Shatner's delivery at this moment is a bit over, a little over the top, which is okay because it's Shatner and that's what he does. But it is Kirk, coming to his senses, and this is what Kirk does. This is what makes me, love Kirk, is that he's the one who just sort of, guys, hang on a minute. Like, what are we doing to each other? We've been trained to fight in cases like this where we weren't at each other's throats. And Kirk is being the voice of reason, even to Spock, because sometimes it's the other way around.
Yeah.
But he's also, you can tell he's fighting it. Like, he's feeling the effects. He notices that he's feeling the effects of this because he says, look at me. And it is that over Shatner-y, but I love it. I think it's perfect for this.
Yeah, for this one, I agree.
He's being affected by an entity, and he's noticing. He's saying, "Look, I'm hyping it all up. He's sweaty. He's vehement. It's a great moment because he's trying to use his mind and his own logic to talk himself out of where his emotions are being pushed to."
Look at me. Look at me.
He's really fighting the effects of the alien. Because he's clenching his hands, and he stops himself and he composes himself again. And he says,
2 forces aboard this ship, each of them equally armed. Has a war been staged for us, complete with weapons and ideology and patriotic drum beating, even Spock, even race hatred?
I mean, yeah, it's over the top, but I love it.
I love it. And I love that he also says the phrase patriotic drum beating. Because again, talking about 2022, people who aren't paying attention to what's going on because they're, whichever side you're on, patriotic drum beating. So I feel like, again, it's such a strong message that we all really need to listen to about being manipulated into fighting each other and thinking that we're fighting for something else that we're not really fighting for.
I totally agree. And I also think, this is a moment where it's in looking at the people that he loves and respects and honors and watching their behavior that helps him to see that there's a problem. And my guess is both of you and probably everyone listening has had people in their family or friends or someone they went to high school with who you care about, and you've watched them maybe on social media start to say some stuff where you go, I can't believe that this is what this person is now doing. I can't believe that Scotty is like yelling at Spock. Like, this is how it's become so divisive that we've seen transformations of people that we know are good people deep down.
That's an excellent
and again,
way.
Both sides.
That is an excellent way to make this episode even more relatable and more relevant in some ways today than it even was in 1968. Because when you see people you know and love, and they're saying things that you cannot believe that they would say, whether it's on social media or elsewhere, and you just go, what's happening to us? What's happening to us? This episode resonates on such a different level than it did for the last 50 years that I've been watching Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I love the way that Kirk says, even, and he does that pause, but he goes, race hatred, because to him, that's ridiculous, that nobody should have that. It's not a normal thing that somebody it's unthinkable to him that they would have race hatred.
Apparently, it is by design that we fight. We seem to be pawns.
But what's the game? And whose? And what are the rules?
Sulu's in a Jeffries tube trying to fix the life support, and he says, I can't do it. The circuits aren't responding. And then,
just like that, the lights go on.
Power and life support restored. Remote's on standby.
Good work.
But Captain, I didn't do it. Everything just came on by itself.
And they're having the same kind of conversation in engineering with the Klingons because they want it to be off.
What power is it that supports our battle yet starves our victory? Interrupted at their main life support couplings. Where?
Number 6 deck.
And she heads off with a guard. And of course, we see the alien again. And then we see Chekhov climbing down a ladder.
Just the way he's holding the sword, he keeps wrapping his hand around the blade. It's super weird. But it's just another piece of this, wow, something's really wrong. The way he's not holding it with any care. And you would not hold your blade. It doesn't make any sense.
I guess he's just looking for Klingons, but he is so far gone. Like we see Scotty and we see Kirk and we see McCoy come in and out of the effects of the alien entity. Like they come to their senses. Like even McCoy, he's going to say soon, hey, if we're pawns, you're looking at one who's extremely sorry. But Chekhov is like way past the point of no return with this.
We see Mara and her guard walk down the corridor. They pass Chekhov's position, and he attacks that guard from behind and takes him out and pushes Mara up against the wall.
And this next scene, to me, has always been one of the most disturbing moments in the original series. And it is a disturbing moment that has increased with time, just seeing basically an attempted rape scene on the Enterprise.
I had several thoughts about this. I couldn't agree more. It is horribly disturbing. What's interesting to me, and I think it's worth mentioning, is this is the second attempted rape on the Enterprise.
That's right.
And that I think that we can say, if Captain Kirk has that in him that we see in The Enemy Within, Chekhov has this in him. This isn't manufactured. It's magnified. It's brought out by false memories and all these other things. But it's also saying this is what humans do, because historically and even to this day, rape is a weapon of war. And it is something that tragically happens. And this is saying this. And it's not like the bad guys do that. This is been used over and over and over again. And it's horrible. And the way this is filmed is really powerful. He drops his sword. He says,
"You don't die yet."
The camera is very close to them.
You're not human, but you're very beautiful. Very beautiful.
And if a chill doesn't go down your spine when you hear that line, ugh.
And the way that the scene is shot with the close-up on Chekhov, and it's not a focused close-up. He's a little out of focus, and most of his face is dark. So again, Marvin Chomsky is really, he's not just having the scenes, filming the scenes, let's keep going, although he was certainly doing that, but he certainly put effort into the effectiveness of some of these scenes, like I mentioned about the way that he shot Kang, and now with the way that he has shot the attempted rape of Mara by Chekhov. And so he rips her shirt. And she's scared. I mean, Susan Howard is really good at this moment in terms of her effectiveness, showing how she's scared. But when Laurie, when Steve and I were talking about The Enemy Within, and we were talking about, hey, that was 1966, and we're seeing Captain Kirk basically try to rape Yeoman Rand, and now we're seeing in the third season Chekhov try to rape Mara. Like when you were young, when you were a kid watching Star Trek, like what did you think watching these moments?
I mean, I knew even at that age that that's what he was going to try to do. Mm-hmm. I think it's more significant when I look at it now because there are two things. Like one, there's the context, which is in movies and TV shows, I feel like we're only now starting to realize maybe we shouldn't quickly fall back on rape as the next scary, dramatic thing to put in somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think that for many decades, that's just been a fallback. And people don't, maybe the writers aren't always thinking those things through and how important that is and how that shouldn't be something that you just go to. But what I noticed now that's the most significant is that Mara knew immediately.
Oh, yeah.
That's what he was going to do before he started saying those things. She knew that was coming. She knew it was next. First of all, she already, I'm sure, thought that about humans anyway, but she saw it in his eyes and she knew. And that was more chilling to me than the way even that Chekhov looks.
Wow. When we first meet Mara after she beams aboard the Enterprise and she says, I heard about their atrocities, their death camps, they will torture us. And here we are seeing that happen.
Yep.
So it is even more chilling than I ever thought about. But wow, you're right. Absolutely.
I think it's definitely in her performance. And I mean, I'm going to ask the question, is there any doubt in your mind of what happens if Kirk does not show up in the next moment?
Nope.
I think he rapes her.
He rapes her. If Kirk hadn't showed up there with Spock and grabbed him by the shoulder, throwing him against the bulkhead and smacking him, but both sides of the face, and then Spock stopping Kirk, who is now affected by the alien force.
He's not responsible.
And Kirk comes to his senses again. We've seen this happen with our heroes again and again. And this time, what Kirk has done to Chekhov, he says, "What have I done?" This episode is so good. And then the way Kirk goes to Mara, and the way that Susan Howard, like, she takes a step back, like, oh no, now he's going to try it. And the look on Kirk and the way that Shatner plays this moment, he doesn't know what to say. Like, he knows that Chekhov just tried to rape her, and Kirk is desperate to reach Kang, and she is the way that he is going to reach Kang. And he says, he's like rambling, like, because he's desperate. He says,
"An alien entity aboard the ship. It's forcing us to fight. We don't want to. We don't know what its motive is. We're trying to find out. You must help us. Take me to Kang. A temporary truce, that's all I ask."
And she says nothing because she is protecting her nobility, her code, and her husband.
He actually comes towards her almost with his arms out, which is why she recoils.
Yeah.
And I don't think he realizes what he's doing in that case. And then I love that she remains silent. She doesn't talk to them at all for a while.
Right, you're right.
There's a theme we've discussed in the third season, and that is guest stars becoming central characters. And in many ways, the hero of the episode is that Jem had to have this transformation to become the hero at the end of The Empath. Well, this episode is actually about Mara from this point forward. She is the linchpin. Without her, we don't win. And she said she has to be persuaded that this is really going on for all of us to survive.
It's a hard sell for her. Like, she doesn't buy it. Even when Kirk stops Chekhov from raping her, she doesn't go, "Oh, great. Okay, these guys are good." She's still not buying it. She's still waiting each step of the way for the next terrible thing to happen.
There's still a lot that we have to go through in order for Mara to finally say, "I will help you now." And Steve, you're absolutely right. From this point, after sort of being on the sidelines, after we first see her in Act 1, when she beams aboard the Enterprise, from this point forward, it is Mara who initiates the actions that wind up saving both the Enterprise and the Klingons. And Laurie, I've said this before during our third season. I might have been during For the World is Hollow, or it might have been during Tholian Web. But thing is that, say what you want about Fred Freiberger, that he wasn't the right person to produce the third season. He really didn't get Star Trek. And I do believe that is true. But at the same time, it was under Fred Freiberger's watch that you had more women writing screenplays and teleplays for Star Trek. You had Margaret Arman wrote another one. You had Joyce Muscat wrote The Empath. You had Jean Lasetta Rest wrote both the Paradise Syndrome and All Our Yesterdays. And you also had really strong female characters like the Romulan commander. I know we spoke about this elsewhere, Natira of Yanada. In some ways, look, I think Miranda Jones is a flawed character, but she's a strong one. And now Mara, first female Klingon, and she's protecting her code and her nobility, and also, of course, her husband. But all this did happen under Freiberger's watch. So he does deserve credit for doing that. And it was also under Freiberger's watch that you had this episode produced, as well as Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, over the top, but definitely a take on racism. And even an episode like The Mark of Gideon, which was like about overpopulation. All this was under Freiberger. So he does deserve some credit for what went right in the third season.
Maybe. I mean, I could go into each of those and Uncheck some of your boxes. But but I would say in this, so as not to digress and get into too many other episodes, in this case, yes.
We'll have a conversation another time, Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, we had Mira Romaine, we had a lot of stuff going up, but let's just say in this case, yes.
Mira Romaine, yes.
We're in sick bay, and the first thing we hear is that Chekhov's brainwaves shows almost paranoid mania.
After Kirk carries him in,
we
him
should
in his
comment.
arms. Like I want to know. I know you guys had Walter on the show, but I want to know about Shatner carrying him around. I have so many questions.
Well, that was a great moment. They're trying to appeal to Mara. She's not budging. She's not saying a word, and Kirk just says, "Take her." And then he goes back to Chekhov. He's like, "Chekhov," and he picks him up. I mean, it's such a tender moment. First of all, he feels so much remorse because he hit the guy.
Is this what's in store for us? From here on in? Violence, hatred.
And look, those words are not limited to this episode. They were applying to 1968, and they are applying to 2022.
Johnson's heart wound is almost completely healed. The same with the other casualties. Sword wounds in the vital organs, massive trauma, shock. They're all healing at a fantastic rate.
It would appear that the entity wants us alive.
Why? So we can fight and keep coming back for more like some bloody coliseum? What's next? The roar of crowds?
Which I think, again, is so significant when I think about that there's a spectacle of it and that there's always someone else benefiting. It's the divide and conquer. There's always someone else benefiting from other people's conflict.
Absolutely. Yep.
Another thing that's happening at sickbay is Johnson has woken up and is listening to this.
And he's smiling.
And then we hear, and this is, Scott, you brought this up before, but McCoy redeems himself and says,
"Gentlemen, if we are pawns, you're looking at one who is extremely sorry."
And then I love Spock's response.
"I understand, Doctor. I, too, felt a brief surge of racial bigotry."
And then there's a pause.
"Most distasteful."
And they head off to find the alien, and we're in the corridor. And again, we're just bringing Mara with us.
I love the way the scene is done. They're walking down the corridor with urgency, and Kirk sees it first, and he just stops in his tracks. The music cue that is played every time we see the alien entity. That music cue. And you see the alien entity is aware now that the three of them see it. And it goes up into the corner, and it's just hanging there, just waiting. It's a chilling moment because of the way that Kirk just stops in his tracks. So he's been talking about it. Spock came to the conclusion that there is another alien life force aboard the ship, and there it is. This is the reason why this is happening.
What is it you want? What are you doing here?
And then the camera just pans a little to the left, and Johnson is standing there looking red, and not just because of his red shirt.
Reporting for duty, sir.
McCoy release you from sickbay?
I released myself.
Then get back to sickbay.
Not on your life, sir. I'm fit and ready for action.
I order you to get
I've
back.
got my orders. I'm obeying orders. Kill the Klingons. It's never us, isn't it?
Johnson!
And Johnson goes to use the sword against the captain, and Spock saves him with the FSNP, the famous Spock neck pinch.
It's funny. It's very similar to the scene with Chekhov on the bridge, where he wants to go after the Klingons and Kirk is trying to stop him. But in a weird way, this is even scarier. Johnson becomes, to me, sort of the epitome of the mindless soldier. Like, I'm just going to go fight and kill. It's very scary. But the other thing that Spock picks up on is that during the emotional outburst, the energy of the creature goes up. So this is something we've seen a bunch of times in Star Trek, which is we can track the energy by what our emotions are in some alien.
And it has acted as a catalyst, creating this situation. In order to satisfy that need, it has brought together opposing forces, provided crude instruments, in an effort to promote the most violent mode of conflict.
I think there's a moment here, too, where Mara she's taking it in. Like, she's looking at, she doesn't trust them yet, but she's clocking and storing all of the information.
You're right. Because, she has a long way to go before she can even begin to just even slightly kind of trust Kirk and Spock and whatever, the Federation. But you're right, she's still not said anything. But she's not exactly fighting them either.
She's a science officer.
Oh, great point.
She is taking in the information. She's got her own thoughts. She doesn't believe them. She's not sure if this is a show for her to convince her or if it's real, but she's definitely adding up the details in her mind. And I feel like you can see that happening. I feel like that's how she was playing it.
Yep, I agree.
I think that's true. Well, and we don't know how much she's being affected by the alien. She's probably has her own emotions that she's going to have to overcome. And what we do is we finally come up with the beginnings of the plan.
We've got to get rid of it.
Then all hostile attitudes on board must be eliminated. The fighting must end, and soon.
Or we're a doomed ship.
And at this moment, Kirk takes Mara and Spock over to the nearest communicator on the wall, and he tries to reach Kang. And I love the shot when we cut to Kang in engineering, and he is standing there triumphantly, leaning his sword on the control panel in engineering. That's such a great shot.
Kang, this is Captain Kirk. Kang, do you read me?
And he hears Kirk. Kang hears him. But then Mara runs to the wall.
Commander, it's a trick!
And Kirk covers her mouth. Like for a moment, he was maybe open to listening to Kirk. But as soon as Mara went to the wall and screamed into the communicator, it's a trick, he went, nope.
It's so funny because I've seen this episode obviously millions of times since I was a kid. And when I was taking notes as I was watching this time, I wrote, damn it, Mara. And
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, how many times has Kirk been captured and run to the communicator to say, no, it's a trick in some way or another?
Yep.
I mean, that is a class, whether it's Bread and Circuses or Taste of Armageddon, or there's all these times where it's a very similar situation of Kirk trying to get that message out. She's doing exactly what Kirk would have done.
Scotty, sir, the ship's dilithium crystals are deteriorating. We can't stop the process.
Time factor?
In 12 minutes, we'll be totally without engine power.
So this is another great thing about Star Trek. Steve, you and I pointed out on the very best episodes where the problems keep mounting and the tension keeps rising. And now, in addition to heading out of the galaxy, now we have a ticking clock because the dilithium crystals are deteriorating and we have 12 minutes until no engine power. And as if Kirk didn't have enough to worry about, you could see Kirk just kind of shrug. He goes, all right, well, do what you can, Kirk out. And he just looks down and he looks back at the alien entity. And I just love the alien entity is sort of heard all it needed to hear. And you see it move away from the top of the ceiling, down the corridor, and through the wall.
And so we drift in space, with only hatred and bloodshed aboard.
And he says to Mara,
now do you believe?
It's a great moment.
It's such a great moment because he's spelling it out in case anyone in the audience missed it. Right? But you have to, it's TV, you have to do that. So he's lining it all up, and yet it feels like such a natural thing for him to say.
Agreed.
I totally agree. They've added a ticking clock. That's clear what they did. This one doesn't quite work for me because it doesn't quite track right in my head. It's like, wait, what's going on? And 12 minutes but we're going at warp 9 and now it feels tacked on to me. I think everything else is working for me really well, but the ticking clock is less so for me. That is the end of Act 3. And I now have a crazy theory to lay out.
Okay.
Let's
hear it.
And maybe you'll think I'm taking this too far, but I actually don't think I am. So here we have, again, this is the science fiction idea. We have a creature that feeds on hate and anger and violence. And so it is creating circumstances to increase hate and anger and violence so it can grow more powerful. And I believe that this is something, and Laurie, you touched on this before, this is going on exactly in our world. With traditional media, there's the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. And what that means is that the more violent, the more scary, the more we can make you angry, the more you will tune in. And so those corporations are literally making money off of creating anger and fear. And that's not nearly as bad as social media, because the way social media algorithms work is they know when you're scrolling, they know when you're stopping, they know what link you're clicking on, they know what video you're watching. And over and over and over again, social media has learned, because they make money by the longer you stay on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. That's how they make their money. And they know the more extreme things you see, the longer you stay there. And so they are continually showing us more and more extreme things to make us angrier and more fearful. And that is what they live on. They are the creature that we are dealing with. It is real. That is in our world. That is how we get our knowledge, from something that feeds on our hate and anger.
And the more polarized we are, the less likely we are to look at that and notice it. Yep. We are not going to pay attention to what is creating this or bolstering it. We are too busy looking at each other, pointing fingers, and hating each other. And in the meantime, in this case, it's an entity that's growing stronger. But in our case, honestly, it's corporations and companies that absolutely are benefiting economically from all of us being at war with each other.
And if we've seen anything over the last few years, certainly over the last maybe 6 years, is that the more we feed into that, the more that the entity symbolically that you've laid out feeds off of us, the more the division will increase, and the further and further away we will get from working together and resolving all this and putting our hate and our bigotry and our differences aside to be one. But it's not gotten better, it's gotten worse. Yep. And the entity has gotten stronger and redder over these years.
Well, and the thing is that it is not natural for us to question our worldview. So the Klingons have been told that the Federation has death camps and does experimentation. Well, if they get presented with more information that reinforces that worldview, they go, well, that must be true. And that's what we all do all the time. Whatever your bias, it's being fed, and we don't question like, oh, maybe some of the stuff I'm getting fed is not actually correct or has been slanted. And again, that's how you get, and I'm talking about people on my side of the political fence that I see them say and do things like that make me feel like how I feel about Scotty when he comes on the bridge, where it's like, oh my God, why, that's too far. That's too scary. That's too angry. That's too violent. And it's really, really scary. And there's a bunch of people making a lot of money and getting a lot of power out of making us feel this way all the time.
And that is the entity, the alien energy. Yeah, the alien entity. Mm-hmm.
And politicians are doing the same thing, because we've got more extreme viewpoints of people who have not thought things through or researched things. They're just saying whatever they think will get headlines. I mean, headlines are a curse right now, frankly. Headlines and voters. And they don't care if there's anything to back it up. It's still just, let's keep fighting, because if I hate you, then my supporters are going to support me.
Mm.
Well, and when you hear them talk about the base, whether it's whichever base it is, the more extreme things are what get the base to come out and vote. And so politicians keep feeding the fire like the entities do, because that's how they get reelected or elected the first time. All right. Off of the
Act 4.
Back in Act 4. I love that Kirk, by the way, says in his log, Stardate Armageddon.
Very dramatic.
It's Kirk. He's dramatic.
Yes, he has to say it.
And just coming off this conversation when we closed out Act 3, there's that line.
We must find a way to defeat the alien force of hate that has taken over the Enterprise. Stop the war now, or spend eternity in futile, bloody violence.
When William Shatner was reading this teleplay while they were filming for The World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, Bob Justman sent a memo to Fred Freiberger, and he said, I just got a call from William Shatner. He's over in Culver City filming the subterranean chamber for The World is Hollow. And he said that how much he loved the teleplay for Day of the Dove And this is exactly the kind of episodes that we should be doing. And it was because of this line, stop the war now or spend eternity in futile, bloody violence, because this was a direct take on Vietnam. And after this portion of the conversation that we just had a few moments ago, this is absolutely applies.
And we find out we have 9 minutes and 50 seconds left. This is really not a lot of time. And they're trying to figure out how to get to Kang. And we hear,
Kang's wife is, after all, our prisoner. Perhaps a threat.
Aye. Now that's something the Klingons would understand.
That's right back to the racism, you know?
Yep.
And I understand exactly why they do this, which is that Kirk is going to threaten the Mara, and then Mara is going to find out that that was a bluff, and that's what persuades her. And I understand that's what they do. I really don't like Kirk threatening Mara at this moment. I just don't like it.
I don't like that it was Spock's suggestion.
But I don't think that they were really going to hurt her. I think
I don't think so either.
Yeah. I think they're just trying to reach Kang, and what if we threaten Mara and maybe he'll listen. But I don't think that they were ever going to actually do it.
No, of course they weren't going to hurt her, but I think a threat on someone's wife is an escalation. Like it's exactly working against what you need. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't track right for me. But that's what happens is that he threatens her and he says,
We have Mara, your wife. We talk truce now, or she dies. Reply. She has 5 seconds to live.
And she motions like she's going to say something again. And he just saw her, blow it before when she screamed into the communicator. So he stops her and says, reply again. And there's a beat. And he says,
He is a victim of war, Captain. She understands.
That is again, we're talking about establishing what the Klingons are and what we're going to see later on when we get to Next Generation. Is not only is he's saying something about honor to her as a warrior, is that she is a warrior. She understands. It's not that he doesn't love his wife. It's not that he doesn't see this as a tragedy. It's what this culture is.
It's the way of the warrior.
And I think in other circumstances, she would have died. So of course, Mara would have died for honor to, support the Klingon Empire in whatever way she needed to.
And Kirk goes, damn, he called my bluff. And this is the moment that Mara needed to see or hear those words. He called my bluff. After everything she saw with her own eyes, this is what she needed to realize that they are telling the truth.
This is the first time she speaks to them.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're not going...
The Federation doesn't kill or mistreat its prisoners. You've been listening to propaganda fables. How much time?
8 minutes, 42 seconds.
See, I think this works, Steve. I know you don't, but I'm into like, okay, this is it. No more messing around. We gotta fix the problem in 8 minutes and 40 seconds, or we're in deep.
Well, and I'm glad. And maybe I'm crazy that it doesn't work. Of course, it's great that it works for you. It's always better. I always think it's funny when people try to convince other people that things they like they shouldn't like, because you're kind of robbing them of. It's great that it works for you. That's awesome.
There's a very interesting conversation they have here when she realizes that they weren't going to do anything to her.
So this was no trick.
It's the alien that's done this. We're in its power. Our people and yours.
Like Scotty has come around. He's realized what's going on. And then she tells them a little bit about Klingons.
We have always fought. We must. We are hunters, Captain.
She calls him Captain. So she's now got some respect for him.
Tracking and taking what we need. Poor planets in the Klingon systems. We must push outward if we are to survive.
In other words, they have motivations like the Gorn had motivations for doing what they're doing. We might not like what they're doing, but it's not just that they're evil.
But then she says, this is the turning point. She says,
I will help you now.
How?
I will take you to Kang. I will add my voice to yours.
The problem is how are we going to get through Kang's defenses in such a short period of time? And then we come up with intra-ship beaming where they talk about, it's really dangerous and we don't do it because of pinpoint accuracy. And I'm like, we've beamed places We beamed onto the Sirius, which was really tiny. He knew exactly where the bulkhead was. This doesn't really track for me.
Agreed.
I think they needed a reason that they didn't just beam all those trapped crewmen out. So,
oh my gosh.
Great point.
And shouldn't they have just said right then and there, hey, Scotty, while I'm doing this,
get those
crew members out of their lower decks.
That's a great point, Laurie.
You just blew my mind. You just totally blew my mind. Wow.
I also have no idea why they're going to run the transporter room from the bridge. Why don't they just go to the transporter room? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, none of this.
Kirk and Mara go to the
and there's always
room.
Sometimes they have to have someone at the controls. In this case, they didn't because they could do it from the bridge, but there were other times they had to have someone there. So, there's a lot of convenience in the original series.
But we're at
50 minutes.
Yeah.
Can we back up for 1 second? Because there's a line of Spock's that stuck with me my entire life. So I have to bring it up, which is when Scotty is saying that,
but she can't guarantee that Kang will stop to listen. Right, Mr. Spock?
No one can guarantee the actions of another.
Now, why does that line stick out for you for all these
that
years?
Every time from the time I was a kid till now, when I'm dealing with somebody and I want to say this person's going to do something, or if you do this, they'll do something, I remember no one can guarantee the actions of another. And it tempers my plan or my advice with the understanding that the thing you think is going to happen isn't necessarily going to happen.
You are so right.
100%. We're at the transporter room. We hear that it's going to, as soon as you hit energize, you got 8 seconds. Kirk energizes the transporter, walks to the pad, realizes he has the sword, walks back, puts his sword down, then walks back to the pad, taking way more than 8 seconds to do it. But I like the moment, which is he decides, I don't want to materialize armed.
I agree. We're not going to kill today.
Alive. You bring a surprise.
Kang, wait. He's come alone, unarmed. He must talk to you.
And Kang is ready to fight. And goes to attack, and the alien is there, and Mara is pleading with him to listen to Kirk. What I like is that Kang doesn't understand what's happened to Mara. Why is she suddenly taking Kirk's side?
Kang, don't!
What have they done to you, Mara? You out of your mind? What have they done to you?
And that moment, he sees the torn clothing.
I see why the human beast did not kill you.
So he thinks that Kirk ripped her uniform.
No, he doesn't just think that Kirk ripped her uniform.
Yeah.
He thinks that Kirk raped her.
Yeah.
He thinks that Kirk raped her.
Right. Yes.
I think that is also a chilling moment. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Kang overcomes, all of our people have to overcome their violent intentions. The fact that Kang has that in his head and is capable of overcoming his violent intentions in the end is a pretty amazing thing.
They didn't harm me. Listen to him.
Pushes her away, and what does Mara do? She tosses Kirk a sword.
And here we go.
And there's a little bit of fighting.
It's your death. We win.
Nobody wins. Have any more of your men died? We can't be killed.
I do like Kang's line, which is a good question.
But no doubt you will reassemble after I have hacked you to bits.
Would Kirk have reassembled if he had been hacked to bits?
Maybe.
Yep.
I mean, look, Johnson was healing fast after being stabbed in the heart.
Or maybe the alien will just allow one person to come up from down below to keep the numbers even again.
Yeah, possibly. Sure. And at that moment, we see the cavalry is coming. Spock and McCoy in some red shirts with their swords, and
I go, why?
Yeah, I had the same reaction. He said, "Don't come because he'll think that we're coming to fight," and then they show up.
We have to stop all hostility. This just added to hostilities. They should have stayed in the bridge.
Yeah, he told them not to come, but he needed them for the final scene.
Well, and I think maybe the network said, "Hey, can we have a little more fighting? Yeah. We like fighting."
Yeah.
Can you hack at each other's swords again?
As they're fighting, the light gets redder and redder. I wonder why the alien doesn't just hide. Like it's hovering right there so all of them can see it.
Look, Kang, for the rest of our lives, 1,000 lifetimes, senseless violence, fighting, while an alien has total control over us.
And Kirk throws his sword away. As a writer, I dislike what I believe are accidental rhymes. Accidental rhymes tend to be bad writing.
All right. In the heart, in the head. I won't stay dead.
Oh, right. Well, at this moment, it reminded me of that moment in The Empath when Kirk says to the Vians, if death is all you understand, here are 4 lives for you. He shifts his strategy to try and be like, okay, here, fine, kill us. If that's what you want, go ahead. And then they go, oh, wait a minute. So now Kirk is pulling the same tactic with Kang, and he's saying, all right, fine, go ahead. In the heart and the head, I won't stay dead. It'll be the good old game of war, pawn against pawn, stopping the bad guys, while somewhere something sits back and laughs and starts it all over again. Kang is listening, and Mara is off to the side to Kang.
I am your wife. I'm a Klingon. I lie for them. Listen to Kirk. He is telling the truth.
And I just love how you just see the wheels turning in Michael Ansara's performance here. He's looking, he can see this alien entity. His wife is saying, would I lie for them? Like, that's not the word. It's not that she's saying he speaks the truth. She is appealing to him as a commander. She is appealing to him as her husband. She is appealing to him as a Klingon. And she is saying, would I lie for them? And that is what makes Kang stop and drop his sword.
It's that combo of Mara and what you described of what Kirk does. And I think that the relation to the empath is a great example. And it's funny, I think I might have mentioned in our last episode that right now in my other podcast, I'm working on Gandhi and the Richard Attenborough 1982 film. And it's interesting having Gandhi come right at the moment that we're doing Day of the Dove.
Wow.
Because what Gandhi did, his ideas were essentially to weaponize vulnerability. He knew that fighting would only get more fighting, that an eye for an eye leads the whole world blind, as he said. And what he does is you have to hit me. He opens himself to be hurt. And that's exactly what Kirk does. It's Kirk throwing away the sword. There's no way you can convince Kang not to fight with the sword. The only way to convince him not to fight is to open himself up and say, you can kill me.
Wow.
Klingons kill for their own purposes. All fighting must end, Captain, to weaken the alien before our dilithium crystals are gone.
We get on the intercom, and first Kirk says,
This is Captain Kirk. A truce is ordered. The fighting is over.
It's hard to lay down your weapon when a dude is swinging a sword at you. So the Enterprise crew isn't quite ready to lay down their weapons. And then Kang comes up.
This is Kang. Cease hostilities. Disarm.
Here's my question. Does Kang look disappointed? Does Kang sound disappointed?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, definitely.
Why do you say that, Laurie?
I think you can see it in his face that that's not a command he likes to give. It's not, he thought they were winning.
Yeah.
And so now he has to tell everybody, and especially they're winning if he thinks that maybe some of the Enterprise crew has in fact laid down their arms because he can't see what's going on out there. And so now they really have the upper hand because Kirk just told his people not to fight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also think, frankly, that convincing a bunch of people that I can only imagine are feeling like Johnson to lay down their arms in the midst of a fight just because you told them to, I don't believe this. What I wish had happened is that Kang and Kirk both do what Kirk did, which is walk between the fighters unarmed.
Oh.
I wish there was a visual way to stop them rather than just because Johnson's not going to stop fighting just because Kirk says stop fighting. That's not going to happen.
I think one of the things that this episode suffers from at this point is the same thing that the last episode, For the World is Hollow, suffers from, is that we got to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So the end of Act 4, it's like you could just feel it rushed, that we got to wrap this baby up so we can come in on time. And in terms of our running time for the episode, 50 minutes. And all of this last stuff here feels a little contrived, a little wonky and a little rushed. But that would have been a hell of a scene, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a shortcut, and it doesn't work except for the authority in Kang's voice.
Yeah. No, I think they do a good job with it.
Yeah.
Cessation of violence appears to have weakened it, Captain. I suggest that good spirits might make an effective weapon.
And I love that Kirk walks to the middle of engineering, looks up at the alien entity and says,
Get off my ship. You're a dead duck here. You're powerless. We know about you. And we don't want to play.
It's such a great moment. And then Kang just joins in and says, just like such a quotable, iconic line from Star Trek.
Out! We need no urging to hate humans. But for the present, only a fool fights in a burning house.
Only a fool fights in a burning house. There's so much great dialogue. It says also, we have no urging to hate humans. It's so good. It's so good.
That was a loaded line. We need no urging to hate humans. I'm like, oh, okay, which side are you on again? So, there's that moment.
And the moment which we're going to end with, they all start laughing at the entity, which is weakening. And then in the midst of his laughter, Kang gives Kirk a big slap on the back. And I love Kirk's look over of like, why I oughta keep laughing. It's great.
It looks like it hurt.
It pushes him forward. It's great. We used to do it as kids. We used to imitate that slap all the time.
Well, that slap looks like it hurt.
Yep.
And the reason for that is because during the filming of this episode, Barbara Eden came to the set and Shatner was being a little flirty with Barbara Eden, who's married to Michael Ansara. And Michael Ansara is seeing William Shatner, being the Lothario, flirting with his wife. So this was his way to make it hurt. So he slapped him in the back really hard. And that is when we see the alien leave the Enterprise, but not die, not disintegrate, not dissipate. It's just out there.
Yeah. We don't find out what happens to it. We don't find out anything about it. And because the episode ends there, we also don't find out, how things went afterwards when they had to get the Klingons back to wherever they were going to take them. There's a lot of missing follow-up there.
I'm glad you brought that up, Laurie, is because there was going to be follow-up with what do we do with the Klingons now? Because in the teleplay for this episode, there was a scene, a final tag scene that takes place on the bridge, but it was not filmed because the episode was already running over in terms of timing to make it 49 minutes without the ending credits. So in a cut tag scene, Kang and Mara are on the bridge and Sulu sets a course for a neutral planet where the Klingons could be dropped off. And at this point, Kang asks Kirk why he reveres peace when there's, quote, a galaxy to be taken with its riches. And after some back and forth, Kirk finally says to Kang, cooperate or fight uselessly for all eternity. A universal rule you Klingons had better learn, because we did. And that is how Day of the Dove was written to end.
Now, Scott, I had read this, and I feel like you would know if I read this in I can't remember where I read it, but that early on, the script also had a peace march at the end with singing.
I have it in my notes right here, Laurie. And early versions of the outline. The episode ended with a peace march, not only a peace march, Laurie, but also, the peace march is what robbed the aliens at the point of the writing of the outlines of their power. But Uhura also sang a peace anthem.
Oh.
But when Fred Freiberger went through and he did his revised outline after Jerome Bixby did 4 versions of an outline, Freiberger went through with the budget in mind. And instead of making the Dorn race humanoids, he said, let's just make it one energy force. And, then we don't have to pay all these extras. But regardless, yes, you're right. There was supposed to be a peace march and there was supposed to be a peace anthem. And Freiberger said, we don't need that. The episode is making its point without going way too over the top with a peace march and a peace anthem.
Good call.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, talk about being... one is let's stimulate a bunch of ideas and make you think. And the other is preaching and saying, this is what you should think.
So that brings us to the end of Act 4 of Day of the Dove. And right now, let's get right into our exclusive interview with Susan Howard. Enjoy. And joining us right now on Enterprise Incidents, we are so excited to be joined by Susan Howard, who played Mara on Day of the Dove. Susan Howard, welcome aboard Enterprise Incidents, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. 100 years ago, guys.
Well, it feels like just yesterday for us because Susan, what's really, truly amazing, have you been able to wrap your head around the fact that you are the very first woman to ever play a Klingon on Star Trek?
It took a long time because, first of all, let me tell you guys, I was a contract player under contract to Screen Gems Columbia, and Millie Gussie, who was the head of casting there, she had brought me under contract. She left, and she went to Paramount. And Millie was a fan of mine. I adored her. She was a wonderful lady, and she really helped my career. Anyway, she must have called over to Screen Gems and said, I want Susan Howard to come over here to Paramount because we're doing this series called Star Trek, and I want her to play this girl in it. I had no idea. I had no idea. Had no idea what it was, had never heard of it, didn't know anything about it. But I thought, you don't really have a choice if you're a contract player. Sometimes you do. Anyway, I said, sure, great. I mean, I love Paramount. It's a great studio. So I went over to Paramount and got the script, and I read it, and I thought, well, this is interesting. This is really neat. So, in fact, I did. I liked the script. I thought I liked what it said. It was, I don't know, it was very positive. It was uplifting. It was hopeful. And I went, they said, okay, now you've got to go to the makeup and wardrobe. And I said, great, okay, let's go. So I went. Little did I know they were going to tint my hair brown, okay? And they tinted it brown. And then they said, and we're going to try this makeup on you. It was half brown and half black and half green. And they put this all over you. And I thought, well, now that is really interesting. Then they made this awesome costume with these boots that went all the way up my leg. I thought, this is really fun. But I didn't have a clue. Didn't have a clue what it was about or anything. And over the years, obviously, it's been something that I get fan mail at least 4 or 5 times a week, letters from people who love the show, loved my character. And I think as much as anything, what a lot of them have said is, you weren't weird looking. And I thought, did you see the show? Anyway, and that was, my thinking about it. And it's been a real honor, quite honestly, to have been in one of those that I guess will go down in history, if you will, as being one of those kind of cult shows that people remember. And I think one of the most interesting things for me was I was in Washington, D.C. quite a few years ago with my mom, and I was showing her around, and I said, we're going to go to the Air and Space Museum because I want you to see it. It's fabulous. So we go in to the Air and Space Museum, and my mother goes one way and I go the other, and all of a sudden I hear my mother go, oh! And I went, oh, my Lord, what happened? And I run into the next room, and she says, it's you. And I went, what? She says, it's you, and she pointed. Guys, they had done an exhibit of Star Trek, and it was Day of the Dove, which gives me cold chills. There I was. It was me in my costume and everything. And I thought, well, some people live a lifetime and never get in the National Archives, and here I am because of Star Trek. It was so cool. I mean, and everybody turns around and goes, what? And my mother's going, that's her. That's my daughter. I mean, that was neat. It was cool.
That's so incredible. I mean, because I assumed that it just felt like it was another job, like a lot of different jobs. I'm sure you went on
you didn't consider it anything because you didn't know. You just, like you said, it's another TV series, So and at Screen Gems, mainly all we did were, Flying Nun and Bewitched and, Here Come the Brides and, that kind of thing. So I had no idea about science fiction-y stuff. So I loved it.
So the question I have for you, Susan, is when you were all made up and, with the hair and the makeup and the
Right.
costume and the boots and the wardrobe, and you looked at yourself in the mirror,
Uh-huh.
what did you think when you saw yourself made up as Mara the Klingon?
I thought I was Mara the Klingon. I thought this is good because I love character stuff anyway. And I thought, oh, this is really good because I honestly thought it was very imaginative and creative what they did. And I guess through some of the letters that I've had over the years, they really liked the way that our makeup was done, that we weren't bizarre, weird, strange looking. We'd have things growing out of the sides of our head or, they didn't try to make us unattractive. In fact, the guys, and Michael, myself, and the other, we kind of looked normal, sort of, as
Right.
normal as you could be, right?
What was it like, since you didn't know the show, and what was it like walking onto that set? I mean, that's had to be a pretty different set from other shows that you had worked on.
Well, honestly, I didn't. I just assumed that, this was another show and this is what you do. And I remember them saying, now, one of the things when you materialize it, when you come out of here, this is what you do. You kind of have to, pretend like you're all of a sudden you've materialized. You've here, so you kind of move a little bit. I went, okay, I can do that. Okay. But it was fun because it was just, a big old set with all the accoutrements that they had for the Enterprise, and everybody set up there, Uhura and all of them, and they were very nice people, all of them. None of them were not friendly, or it was seemed to be a very compatible set, and very confined. I mean, it wasn't a big, huge set. You didn't have all of these different sets and hallways, and this. Pretty much, we stayed in basically the same area. But it was very interesting in the sense that you take a lot of those things in as an actor, and you're trying to establish what it is you're supposed to do, how it is you're supposed to act and react, what is your job there, what kind of character are you supposed to be? And I kept thinking, she is supposed to be, because her husband's the big dude, she is supposed to be his co-equal, but she's not one that is aggressively out front. And I tried to play it that way. So I think I did.
Well, listen, you brought up Michael. That would be Michael Ansara, who played
I love
Kang.
Michael Ansara, yes. Wonderful.
Let's talk about Michael. I mean, because even though Michael Ansara was not the first actor to play a Klingon on Star Trek, that would have been John Colicos in the very first season, Errand of Mercy. But Susan, watching Day of the Dove, watching Michael Ansara's performance as Kang, like the whole template for the Klingons moving forward, for all the other Star Trek shows and movies to follow, were basically set by Michael. Michael raised the bar.
I totally agree. But that's because
what was it like working with him?
Well, I mean, he's a professional, okay? And you knew that. I had worked with Michael before at Screen Gems on Here Come the Brides, because he and I had done one of the Here Come the Brides together, and he was an Indian who kidnapped us. Anyway, but Michael was a professional. He was an actor who, I think as much as anything, as I was saying, enjoyed the character, enjoyed bringing something to it, enjoyed the fact that maybe he was doing something that maybe, somebody would take notice of. He was a really lovely, lovely man. One
of the things that we noticed in watching the episode is that for the last third, it's really about you observing, your character observing what's going on and deciding whether or not. So what was that like? What choices did you make as an actor?
Well, that's what I was telling you in the beginning. I think Mara was one who she observed. She stood, not back, but she did, and looked and took things in to try to discern what it was, what was going on, not only with her, but with Kang and with the Enterprise itself, with Kirk, with the rest of the crew. She was trying to understand what was happening. And it was confusing, quite obviously, but at the same time, she understood that there had to be a reason for what was happening, and it wasn't obvious. It had to be worked through. Okay, I think she was a very intelligent woman. Okay.
So during our conversation about Day of the Dove, we talked about how Mara was observing Kirk and Spock and observing Kang until she was sure that Kirk and Spock were telling the truth.
That's right.
So my question is, you talked about working with Michael Ansara.
Right.
What was it like working with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy?
Well, again, you're talking professionals, okay? Because the majority of people that I ended up working with in most of my career, other than later on, were professional. They came out of the theater, okay? So there was a sense of respect, if you will, for not only who you are, but who the other person is and who you're relating to. And that was kind of it. You played the characters. You didn't try to assume something else. You actually did what the script said. And that's what they did. And that's what we all did. And you treated it as such, which was really good, because that's called acting.
You had to do what I think were some pretty scary scenes, particularly in the scenes with
especially the one with the Russian. Yes.
Yeah, but so I was wondering, as an actor, how do you approach scenes like that?
Well, you you just prepare yourself for it, and you try to understand what a person would do in a situation like that, and you let it happen. One of the main things is always to pay attention to the other actor. What is his role? What is he going to do? How is he going to present himself? What kind of emotions is he coming forth with that will give you something to respond? Because acting is reacting. That's basically it. So you really, in the rehearsals, you spend your time trying to focus on how he speaks, how he moves, and what his aggressive attitudes are. So that's what you do.
I mean, it's a powerful scene. And do you remember
I agree.
rehearsing? Do you remember rehearsing with Walter Koenig on just how to get it just right?
I do. And I remember when the top was torn, and making sure that it worked the right way. Yeah, I remember all of that. Yeah. Yep.
So what I'm curious about, so you do this job, and it's a gig like a lot of other gigs I'm sure you did, and then, no one could have anticipated that now, 55 years later, we're still talking about this show. I was wondering, was there a moment where you first realized that something special was happening, that people continued to talk about that episode and your performance?
Throughout the years, okay? I mean, I would go to different places, even when I was doing like Petrocelli, and they would say, "Oh, you," or I would be in Washington, or I'd be someplace else, and they'd go, "You were Mara, I loved Day of the Dove," and I'd go, "Wow," and I had different things that I would sign and give to them, but it was the audience built this, guys. Okay, the show itself, the script itself was excellent, but I say the same thing about Dallas. If it had not been England, London specifically, Dallas would have never happened, okay? The same thing with Star Trek, and it's a shame that it was canceled, but the public, and unfortunately, I guess, they did not pay enough attention to the attitudes that the people had in regards to the show, how much they liked it, and that's why they ended up obviously bringing it back. But it was not the same show as it was. So,
right, we agree with that. I'm just curious. Your episode was directed by Marvin Chomsky. The show at that time was Fred Freiberger. Do you have any memories about working with him?
Wonderful. Fred Freiberger. Oh my gosh, these are wonderful names, wonderful people, talented, knowledgeable, great respect for their gifts and their talent. Yep.
Do you have any fond memories, any memories that you cherish about the making of Day of the Dove?
Well, I think as much as anything, it was really when I went to the hair and makeup and wardrobe. I had never been in anything like that before. I'd done a Mission Impossible where they put one of those death masks on your face, and I nearly choked to death. I thought I was going to die, and they put the straws up your nose, and you have to breathe. I'm going like, and I think I looked like I was dying when they took it off. But that was the most weird thing I ever did. But this was fun. This was like when you went to college and you got wardrobe and hair and makeup, and that's what it was about. I have great fond memories. The wardrobe people were wonderful. They were having as much fun as I was. They really were.
Right.
It was creative, what they were doing. Makeup, same thing. Hair, same thing. Every day when you'd go, I mean, they would have fun. They were delighted to be doing what they were doing. The show was a very compatible group of people. Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you actually watched the episode? Do you remember seeing it?
Yes. I went, whoa. And it was like, whoa, okay. Because quite honestly, when you're doing something like that, you don't totally understand exactly the whole thing. It's like you're going to be doing Hamlet, but you don't really know it until you get to the end of it, okay? So it's that's it. You have to see it all put together and understand that it was really a unique show. It really was, because I've watched a lot of the old Star Treks, but and I'm not saying this because I was in it or anything like that. It's one of the, I'm not sure I have exact words for it, but one of the most, to me, influential shows that's ever been done because of the message that it put forth. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah. We need it today. We need that today.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to ask. That episode really is about a serious issue, and I wonder, how that felt to be working on something that had such a powerful message.
It was good, although at that point you think you don't realize that it's that powerful, Steve. Okay, because back then we weren't involved in all the difficulties and the situations and problems in the world and all that we are today. But, there's like a foresight. Somebody, obviously, down the road had an idea that this might be very impactful someday, and it has been, and I'm grateful for that. I am grateful to have been allowed to be a part of it. Yep.
Well, we are grateful, Susan, that you joined us for this wonderful conversation about Mara and the making of Beta Dove.
Well, good. I'm glad. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you and getting some insight into what it was like to make that episode.
And thank you so much, Susan. We appreciate it. We are so grateful.
Guys.
God bless you back.
Okay. Take care.
So that was absolutely fantastic, hearing what Susan Howard had to say about her experience making this episode of Star Trek. But Scott, I would like to hear what other people had to say.
Well, back when William Shatner wrote Star Trek Memories, which came out in 1993, and I love that book, he referred to Day of the Dove as extremely good. Michael Ansara had this to say about Shatner. He said, Shatner never let up. His tremendous enthusiasm was communicated to anyone working on that show or watching it. I don't wish to detract from Nimoy, who's a real professional, but Shatner had the tougher part. He had to create a character without the auspices of alien makeup and mannerisms. When it came to playing Kang, he said, what a magnificent character to play. Immediately, just from reading the script, I knew how special the role was and how rare it was to find a character like this in either television or film. Kang had nobility, and that's a quality that I have always been fascinated by. And then James Doohan said, we were probably having a little too much fun on that episode. It was well into the third year, with Gene Roddenberry missing and Paramount in control. So when we got the chance to let loose, we did. It was a pretty wild concept, and I suppose that we were getting caught up in the moment, but a lot of people really liked that episode. And yes, they do. And I love it even more, which I did not think was possible now.
I also think it fits in, looking at the way that you guys look at the show as almost serialized, that this, in a way, almost, it doesn't quite justify, but it explains a lot about Kirk's attitude in Errand of Mercy, which is that we see that the Klingons, as soon as they see him, that they have agonizers, that is how they deal with it. They do embrace bloodshed and war, and they conquer. And so even though he was being, over the top and errand of mercy, to the point that he couldn't see when there was an opportunity for peace. He couldn't see his own behavior. He still, all those things he thought about, he was trying to protect them from, were real things. And that those are things that Klingons do. And I think this episode kind of does show that.
And Laurie, you pointed that out. You wrote an article recently for StarTrek.com where it was like in defense of Captain Kirk. But you went through all these great traits that for why Kirk has really endured over these years. And you pointed out Errand of Mercy as an example where Kirk was not afraid to admit that he was wrong. And I think that because he did see the error of his ways in Errand of Mercy, even while fighting the effects of the alien entity in Day of the Dove, he still was like, we're not going to fight. This is wrong. It's a great through line connecting Errand of Mercy to Day of the Dove and Core to Kang. I think that's a really, really great point. And I just, when you look at Star Trek as a serialized show, you would almost sort of assume that that's what the writers kind of had in mind. I mean, of course they didn't. And we are connecting the dots in a way that maybe it's a bit of a stretch sometimes, but it still works. Steve, what do you think?
I've been trying to think of how I want to sum up my feelings about this episode. The first thing is I really like it, and I think as we pointed out, some great performances. It's very disturbing watching what happens to our crew. And finding a way to a resolution, I think really works. The thing I keep going back to is that this is not really a metaphor for me anymore. Like, we're all on a ship. We're all trapped here together. Mm-hmm. We're getting increasingly angry at each other. There are a lot of people in this country who are buying ammunition right now. This is not a joke. This is for real. And the thing is, there's no challenge in making peace with people you agree with. There's no challenge in making peace with people that have never done anything to you. And because I'm in the midst of Gandhi again, and during partition in India, there are somewhere between 200,000 and 2 million people killed. And all sorts of atrocities were committed, like the atrocities the Klingons and the Federation are talking about. And they found a way to make peace. They found a way to get to nonviolence against people they really, really hate. And we're not at that level. There haven't been hundreds of thousands of deaths. There haven't been those kinds of atrocities in this country yet. And yet we got a lot of hate. And so figuring out how to, as you said, Scott, or as Kirk said, not killing today, and looking not at the other person and going, what's wrong with you, but looking at yourself and going, where have I gotten this wrong? How am I too angry? How can I find a way to reach across and make peace? That's the big thing I keep thinking about.
It really says something that here's a show that premiered in 1966, 56 years ago. And on one hand, are like going through these episodes with this comb and dissecting it to within an inch of its life, and seeing these episodes in new light because of turns of events that have happened just in the last 5 or 6 years, and then the way that these episodes reveal new discoveries because we're looking at it with a different set of eyes, and yet it's 56 years old and it's still relevant. In some ways, it's still ahead of its time. In some ways, it's very dated. In some ways, it has not aged well. But in more ways than not, it has aged well. And it's like a fine wine in which it's aged better than so many other television shows over the course of the last, the 80 years. But this episode in particular, like when I was a kid, when I was in like middle school, like you, Laurie, when I was in high school and into college and beyond, and I started working for Creation in the 1990s. This was an episode that I always really enjoyed because it was a fun show, a lot of action, and again, Michael Ansara was just superb. But in more recent years, rewatching this with a different set of eyes after doing this deep dive podcast and seeing just in all the ways in which Day of the Dove is speaking to today's times and it works is just really mind-blowing to me.
And scary. I mean, it's scary when I think about how true it is. We did during lockdown when everybody was in their
close
houses
home.
doing
Yeah.
everything. Yes. Yeah. Trek movie, we did every Sunday night. We would do a Star Trek viewing party and we would just pick an episode and we'd all get on Zoom and watch it together. And when we watched this one, we were all struck by how 100% relevant it is to what's going on right now.
You know, I remember when Black Lives Matter happened and the protests were happening, you know, there were many articles that were written, whether it was in the LA Times or the New York Times, in the way that which movies and television have always looked at racism over the years. And of course, you know, the one movie that they always picked with that was Do the Right Thing. But on at least 3 separate occasions from 3 separate publications, and we're talking like LA Times, New York Times, quality, like prestige, there's Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. And I like that episode a lot. I know that's also a heavy-handed one, but like that episode absolutely held up in the wake of Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's just amazing that this show is just so like, I mean, that's what makes the original series so great, is that was the plan. And yeah, there was a subtlety to it when Gene Roddenberry was in charge, when Gene Kuhn was in charge, even when John Meredith Lucas was in charge. But when Freiberger came in, I mean, the subtlety went out the window, but it was still effective. And we're still talking about these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, this episode doesn't even feel like a season 3 episode for the most part, except for a few shortcuts. But story-wise, it feels like I'm always surprised when I see, oh yeah, it was season 3. Really?
Yeah. But you know what, Laurie, I want to ask you, like, do you remember the first Star Trek episode you ever saw?
I don't remember which episode. You know what's funny? Instead of remembering the first one I saw, I remember when I had seen so many and I used to comb through TV Guide, like looking for the reruns.
Yeah.
I remember the last 2 on my list to check off. And then I got one of them. And then there was one left that I hadn't seen, and waiting and looking every day for that one to come on. Because I'm sure I'd read the Blish adaptation before I even saw it. So last one I saw in the whole series was The Savage Curtain.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
with Obsession right before it as the last 2 that I was like, I know they exist, but I've never seen them.
And what is your all-time favorite TOS episode?
I never can. It so depends on my mood, what I feel like. Do I want great scenes? Do I want to be entertained? Do I want a big moral? Do I want a great guest star? Do I want a big Spock moment? I mean, it completely changes from one day to the next. I can never do those ranking. I never rank things. I just can't operate that way.
No, I completely understand. I do have a number 1 fave that's just right at the tippy top. It's Metamorphosis, but when I get through 2 through 5, it, you know, that order changes depending on my mood. So it does make ranking extremely difficult. But Laurie, cannot thank you enough for joining us for this deep dive of Day of the Dove. And where can people find you on social media?
Twitter is the best. I'm Floobish, FLOOBISH, on Twitter and Instagram. But Twitter is where I have the most fun, and it's also where I put my little Riker pictures everywhere.
I love your Riker pictures.
My Riker action figure has been on some adventures. He had a mammogram yesterday, so he gets around.
Doing okay.
Yeah, he's good. He's fine. He's doing a lot of different things, but he's coming back to Vegas, which is where I found him.
Oh, fantastic. I can't wait. Can I get another picture with Riker?
Yeah, I mean, I have one of you with him, but I will definitely get another one.
Well, make sure also that you check out Laurie on trekmovie.com, and also be sure every Friday, if you want to know, look, with all the new Star Trek shows and with all the conventions are back in full force and with everything that's happening in the world of Star Trek, there's so much happening. And if you want to just find it, go to one place to like listen to all the breaking Trek news about who's cast in like season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Not that they've announced that yet, but just other breaking news about Star Trek. Do go to Trek Movie and listen to that Star Trek podcast, All Access. Those episodes drop every Friday morning. And Steve Morris, my colleague, my friend, my partner here on Enterprise Incidents, where can people follow you?
Well, they can follow me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. Of course, my other podcast, I'm just going to recommend you tune in right now because you'll get to hear our multi-episode exploration of Gandhi. And of course, if you want to follow Enterprise Incidents, check us out on Facebook. We're doing a lot on social media there. You can also check us out on Twitter at Enter Incidents, Enterprise Incidents on Instagram. Please subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please review the show. And if you want to support the show, there's a little link right in the show notes that takes you to Anchor, and you could support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. Scott, how would people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mance, and be sure to share Enterprise Incidents on your social media platforms so more people that can find out about Enterprise Incidents that they have not heard us before. People are still discovering us. I'm still getting messages on Twitter and on Facebook from people who say, I just found Enterprise Incidents and I'm only up to like Dagger of the Mind, but I love the show so far. So please share Enterprise Incidents on your social media so more people can discover Enterprise Incidents. And we're sort of on the back end of the original series. We only have about 12 episodes left to go before we're done with Enterprise Incidents on the original series anyway. But next on Enterprise Incidents, after I have to say, the first half of the 3rd season, with the exception of Spock's Brain and with the exception of And the Children Shall Lead, these episodes were pretty good. We've had a lot of great episodes that we've covered so far on the 3rd season, dealing whether it was, of course, Spectre of the Gun and Paradise Syndrome and the Enterprise Incident and Day of the Dove and the Tholian Web and Is There in Truth No Beauty? But now with the next episode, things are going to change because so many of the creative forces of Star Trek have left. Roddenberry was kind of a no-show by this point. Bob Justman was about to leave. Jerry Finnerman was gone. Dorothy Fontana was gone. And we are really going to start seeing Star Trek. The quality is going to drop. And it is, as a lifelong fan, watching it this way and analyzing it, it's a hard thing to experience. But when it came to the performances, these cast members were still giving it their all. And up next is an episode in which they do give it their all. And there are a couple of really great moments, including one of the defining moments of Star Trek in terms of the impact. Joining us next time, please do join us next time for Plato's Stepchildren. This one's going to be a really, really, really interesting conversation. Join us next time on Enterprise Incidents, and until then, keep going boldly.